Hey guys, tonight we're going full freeze mode, straight into the howling Arctic wind with the Viking settlers of the far north. You're not some fierce warrior with a double-headed axe right now. No, tonight you're just you. Slightly underdressed, maybe carrying a leaky goatskin water jug, trudging through ankle-deep snow toward a sagging wooden shelter as the first deep winter frost sets in. You probably won't survive this. But don't worry, none of this is real, and you're probably tucked under a blanket right now with your feet poking out and a cat staring at you like you owe it money. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. What city are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Always curious. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the biting cold with a bone-deep shiver. The sun's been gone for what feels like a week, though it's only been a few hours. That's the thing. Daylight here in the Arctic North isn't so much gone as it is sulking on the horizon, like a grumpy roommate who doesn't want to talk. When you arrived in this tiny coastal settlement, let's call it Hvitfjall or White Mountain, you thought winter might take its time getting started. It didn't. The fjord's already frozen at the edges, the icy wind slices through wool like it's not even trying, the air smells like wet fur, rotting fish and salt. Your boots are stiff with old mud and horse dung. You walk quickly. There are no torches out here. You can't afford the oil, and besides, it's best not to draw attention from the things that live in the forest. When you finally reach the longhouse, it doesn't exactly scream home sweet home, more like barely standing. It's long and low, built from rough timber, its roof hunched under a thick insulating layer of turf. No chimney, no windows, just a low door you have to duck through unless you enjoy forehead bruises. You step inside and boom, total darkness. Then a wave of heatless, smoky air punches you in the lungs. There is no fireplace. What there is, in the centre of the longhouse, is a shallow hearth, basically a glorified dirt pit, with some faint red embers glowing like tired eyes. Smoke wafts lazily into the rafters and stays there. No chimney means the smoke just sort of hangs out. It'll eventually leak through the thatch, or maybe just collect until the roof looks like it's crying. You cough, your eyes water, and someone grumbles at you to shut the door before all the warmth leaves. Warmth is a generous term. You blink around and take in the scene. A few oil lamps dangle from pegs on the walls, dripping tallow onto the dirt floor. There are maybe 20 people in there, curled up like animals in straw-lined divots, huddled under fur blankets or wrapped in layers of wool. Someone's grandmother is snoring like an angry bear. A child coughs in their sleep. A goat bleats once from the far corner, then settles back down with a heavy sigh. Even the animals sleep indoors. The more warm bodies, the better. One of the oldest facts we know about Norse life in these Arctic regions is that communal living was key to survival. That's not poetic. That's literal. One person alone in a cabin here wouldn't last a week. But 20 people, 3 dogs, 6 goats and some sheep, that's central heating. You pull off your crusty mittens, stuff them into your tunic and find a spot near the wall that looks vaguely unoccupied. It smells like someone once spilled fish broth there and no one ever cleaned it up. Perfect. Your eyes adjust more. You notice the hanging meat. Dark, shriveled hunks of what might have once been seal, strung from roof beams to dry. There's a pile of seal blubber too, and a basket of dried berries that taste like punishment. Every item is carefully stored, carefully guarded. This isn't just dinner, it's survival insurance. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Some Viking communities were known to stuff cracks in the walls with dried seaweed. Not just moss or straw, seaweed. Because it's surprisingly effective at blocking wind and holds in moisture without rotting fast, plus it's free and it's everywhere. Welcome to the original Arctic insulation. Now, not everyone agrees on exactly how cold it got back then. Some scholars argue that the Viking Age coincided with a relatively mild period in Nordic climates, the so-called medieval warm period. Others push back, saying the warmth was exaggerated, and that for those living near the Arctic Circle, mild still meant weeks below freezing and snowdrifts taller than you. It's still debated, but either way, the people living here weren't exactly sipping hot chocolate on the porch. You listen to the longhouse settling. Wood creaks, someone mutters in their sleep, somewhere water drips slowly into a bowl, plink, splink, plink. You almost don't hear the wind anymore. But it's still out there, hissing around the corners, scraping across the ice. You don't go outside at night unless you have to. Not unless you want to become a frozen cautionary tale told to children. Your breath fogs in front of your face. Indoors. You lie back against your bundled cloak, pulling it tight around your neck, and close your eyes. The warmth from nearby bodies, the soft snoring, the slow burn of the central hearth, all of it is lulling, hypnotic, like the world has slowed to a crawl. Which it kind of has. Arctic winter does that. It shuts everything down to a gentle hum. No farms to tend, no sailing to do, no raiding, unless you're incredibly bored or incredibly stupid. Someone just farted, loudly, no one acknowledges it. You let out a small sigh, adjust your hood, and sink a little deeper into the straw. Welcome to your first night in the far north. Hope you're a heavy sleeper. Morning, if you can call it that, creeps in like an indecisive shadow. You wake up not because it's light outside, it's not, but because someone stepped on your hand in the dark. They mutter an apology, or maybe it was just a grunt, and shuffle toward the hearth where yesterday's embers are now a memory. You stretch slightly, careful not to elbow the person curled next to you. They're either sleeping or dead. Honestly, it's too early to check. The longhouse is frigid. Your nose is cold, your breath visible, and your joints ache like you've been sleeping inside a sack of frozen turnips. The goat near the corner lets out a sleepy bleat. It smells stronger in here today, like smoked meat, wet wool, and something vaguely fungal. You scratch at your scalp. Yep, lice again. You'll deal with that later, or not. Winter doesn't exactly leave you feeling motivated. There's still no fireplace. That dream you had last night about lounging next to a warm stone hearth with a cup of something steaming? Lies. In this world you make do with the longhouse, a kind of communal living tube, stretched out like a sleeping snake designed for one thing, keeping heat trapped and bodies together. Windows? Don't be ridiculous. Holes let heat out. Light's a luxury, warmth is survival. You sit up and take stock of your surroundings. The rafters are black with soot. Not a clean, rustic, aesthetic kind of black. No, this is thick, tarry, sticky soot. Years of open hearth smoke curling upward and coating everything like a ghost's greasy fingerprints. The roof beams drip from condensation where the smoke meets the cold outer layers. You hear it occasionally, plop, as a fat drop of roof sweat lands in a cooking pot or worse, someone's open mouth. You shuffle toward the fire pit. A few others are already there, crouched and poking at it with sticks, trying to convince some barely burning twigs to remember how to be flames. No firewood here, not in the way you're probably picturing. Forests are distant, and wood is precious. You can't just burn logs willy-nilly. Most of what you've got is driftwood, twigs, peat, dried animal dung. If it solders and doesn't kill you immediately, it's fair game. This central hearth is the heart of the longhouse. It's about 6 feet across, maybe less, shallow, and ringed with stones that have cracked and blackened over time. It's where all the cooking happens, all the light comes from, and all the warmth dares to venture. But it's not a fireplace. No chimney, no elegant mantle, no roaring blaze, just a pit. And that pit barely warms your fingers unless you're sitting right on top of it. You sit with your knees pulled up to your chest, watching the flames struggle to stay awake. Someone drops in a handful of dried moss. It catches, flares bright for a second, then sputters out. Another person adds a flat greyish disc, dried cow dung. It catches more stubbornly, glowing red before coughing up a burst of smoke that stings your eyes. No one complains. You're just glad it's something. Viking longhouses like this one were designed for endurance, not comfort. Thick timber walls, sometimes doubled up with earth and straw packed between them. The roofs? A mix of turf and sod layered like a slow-motion avalanche, angled steep enough for snow to slide off but thick enough to block out the wind. You hear every groan of the timbers, every care, as frost settles deeper into the earth. These structures were meant to stand still while the world outside went numb. You notice something subtle. Your breath fogs a little less near the hearth. Your toes feel slightly more alive. This isn't warmth like a hot bath, it's warmth like not actively dying, which is weirdly kind of nice. People start to move more now. A mother swaddles her toddler tighter, while another child gets handed a chunk of hard bread to gnaw on like a baby wolf. An old man coughs up something horrifying and spits into the dirt. You look away. Hygiene isn't exactly the priority right now. Someone stokes the fire with a carved bellows, primitive but effective. Air rushes through, reigniting the embers, and for a moment you see sparks dance upward into the dark rafters. It's kind of beautiful. if you ignore the fact that half the people in here probably have lung damage from decades of smoke inhalation. Here's a fun historical fact. Many Viking longhouses had a smoke hole, a narrow slit in the roof ridge meant to let the worst of the smoke out. But guess what? In the dead of Arctic winter, they'd often cover that hole with animal hide or turf because any escape route for smoke was also an escape route for precious heat. So yeah, you're basically living in a large wooden smoker. If your clothes don't smell like burnt goat fat after a week, you're doing something wrong. You look around at the others, stooped figures, tired eyes, red noses. These aren't warriors, not today. These are parents, kids, elders, farmers, people doing their best to make it to spring without dying of cold, hunger, boredom, or each other. You've got cabin fever and it's not even December. You hear voices near the door. Someone's back from checking the food storage pit. They say the salted fish is holding, but the smoked reindeer leg has mould. Someone swears quietly. Food loss in winter isn't just inconvenient, it's life-threatening. There are no grocery runs here. There's just what you buried under the snow in a lined pit, what you hung from the rafters, and what's pickling in that wooden barrel no one wants to open. It's hard to imagine living like this for months, but they did. Not just one winter, but dozens of them, generation after generation. And maybe you're wondering why anyone would choose to settle this far north in the first place. Some scholars say it was the promise of free land, untapped resources, or exile from more crowded southern regions. Others think it was just Viking stubbornness. If the gods wanted you dead, they'd take you. Until then, you kept going. The fire finally catches. A slow, low burn. A pot is hung above it. Something broth-like begins to simmer, and the room fills with the hopeful smell of onions and marrow. You lean in, hands outstretched, soaking up what little heat you can, eyes stinging, nose running, heart beating slow and steady. You're still? Here, still breathing. And somehow that feels like a win. You're starting to get used to the sting in your nostrils, that permanent smoky edge that clings to everything like a jealous ghost. Even your hair smells like it's been slow roasting over a bog fire. But it beats the alternative. Because while you're sitting here around the hearth, trying not to inhale too enthusiastically, you realise something kind of unsettling. There are still no fireplaces, not just here, but anywhere in this world. You grew up thinking ancient houses all had cute little stone fireplaces, right? Maybe a chimney, some rustic iron tools, a bear rug in front. Not for Vikings. They didn't build fireplaces in the Arctic North, not the way you'd think. Fireplaces are a luxury of later, more sedentary medieval life. What the Vikings had were open hearths, flat and low, right in the middle of the room. Not decorative, not elegant. Functional, brutal, constantly smouldering, and sure, occasionally responsible for accidental longhouse fires. You scoot a little closer to the flames, careful not to burn your wool socks. Someone already melted a toe hole yesterday. The fire spits weak sparks and spits even weaker heat. This isn't a fire for fun. It's a fire for not dying. No logs stacked neatly beside it. No crackling comfort. Just whatever you could scrounge or trade for that day. Peat, dung, driftwood, or if you're lucky, a few twisted branches that somehow didn't freeze to death first. You look up, and for a second you see how the smoke collects in a thick cloud above everyone's heads. You wonder how no one suffocated. Actually, some did. That's a charming little historical detail. Longhouse smoke inhalation was probably a slow creeping killer. Infants were sometimes suspended in slings closer to the rafters to keep them away from the cold floors. Guess what's up there? Yeah, pure uncut smoke. Good luck, tiny lungs. You sit back and press your palms to your thighs, warming the wool with body heat. Every part of your life now revolves around two goals: preserving warmth and conserving fuel. You don't just toss more wood on the fire. That's not how any of this works. Every scrap burned is one less scrap for tomorrow or next week. Or that particularly miserable day in February when you'll wonder if your toes still technically count as part of your body. There's an odd comfort in the rhythm of it all. The fire needs tending, the stew needs stirring. Someone's drying out their socks by balancing them on a stick, and another's grinding dried herbs with a worn stone. Nobody's sitting around writing epic poetry right now. That stuff comes later. First, survive the next 4 months. And here's something quirky. Viking longhouses didn't use fire for warmth alone, they used it as a social compass. Everything important revolved around the hearth. It was the centre of daily life, the spiritual anchor of the home. You ate there, crafted there, slept within arm's reach of it. People told stories by its flickering light, sang songs, planned marriages, gossiped, grieved, and made quietly bitter jokes about how many more weeks they'd be trapped inside with the same 20 faces. One of the elders starts humming a tune, a low, droning melody that sounds older than any of you. Someone else joins in, then another. It echoes softly off the timber walls like the house itself is humming. You don't know the words, but your foot taps instinctively. It's not for entertainment, it's for sanity. And while we're on the topic of what counts as warmth, let's talk about light. Fire doesn't just give off heat. It gives off the only real light source available during these heavy grey months. Sunlight is more suggestion than reality up here. You might get an hour of half-light, then back to the dim abyss. That's central hearth. It's your sun now. You stare into it like a moth with seasonal depression. No candles here, not really. Those are for rich people and monks. What you've got are oil lamps, most of them made from soapstone or clay. They burn fish oil or animal fat, and if that sounds gross, congratulations. It is. The smell is memorable, especially when mixed with wet wool and goat breath. But they work, and that's what matters. You remember something you overheard yesterday. Someone's cousin in the next village over tried building a chimney. Just a little one, a narrow vent through the thatch. Everyone thought he was a genius, until the first snowfall collapsed half the roof. Now his family's sleeping in their goat shed, and he's become a walking cautionary tale. You shake your head and stifle a laugh. Even now, centuries later, scholars still debate just how widespread chimneys or flues were during the Viking Age. Some believe there may have been rudimentary ventilation systems in larger halls or wealthy homes, but for the average Arctic settler, nope. If you want heat, you'll take your smoke with it, and be grateful. You shuffle to the side as someone brings in a basket of fresh-cut peat. The smell hits you like earthy bread soaked in pond water. It's damp and crumbly, but once dried, peat burns with a slow, steady heat that lasts. It's been your main fuel for a while now, and you've developed a weird affection for it. The basket thuds down beside the hearth, and people instinctively lean closer. A middle-aged woman, you think her name is Brynhild, kneels and begins feeding the hearth with the peat gently, methodically, like she's tucking in a child. You watch her fingers move, practiced and patient. You ask if she ever misses real fires, like the kind with big logs and chimney smoke trailing into the sky. She snorts. Real fire is for dreamers, she mutters. This kind burns longer. That's the lesson here, maybe. You don't get perfection, you get endurance, you don't get a crackling fireplace and a good book, you get a half-lit hearth, moss smoke in your lungs, and the steady comfort of knowing it's still burning. You lie back again, head against the wall, and stare up through the hazy smoke cloud above. It shifts and curls like a ceiling made of ghosts. Somewhere outside, the wind picks up again. You can hear it clawing at the thatch and snaking through unseen cracks in the wood. The cold's always just a breath away, but for now, you're wrapped in wool, surrounded by strangers who are slowly becoming family, and warmed by a stubborn, smoky excuse for a fire. Still no fireplace, still alive. Your back aches from sleeping on packed dirt, and you're starting to suspect your right hip has formed a permanent dent in the ground. But the longhouse is still standing, and you haven't frozen into a Viking-shaped popsicle yet. So, congratulations, you've made it another day in the Arctic North without a fireplace, central heating, or even the luxury of breathable air. Now let's talk about insulation, because that's where the real magic happens. Forget fiberglass or foam panels. What surrounds you here is insulation in the rawest, most medieval sense of the word. Thick logs, earth, turf, and a liberal helping of whatever we could shove into a crack. You run your hand along the inside wall of the longhouse. It's rough-hewn timber, worn smooth by the generations of shoulders brushing past it. Gaps between the logs are stuffed with moss, animal hair, seaweed, and straw. Basically anything that didn't crawl away when poked. And on the outside, layers of earth. Literal dirt, pressed against the walls, built up in banks like a muddy hug to keep the wind from punching its way through. On top of that, turf roofing. You've never appreciated grass more. This isn't your average lawn. It's sod cut this thick, flipped upside down, and layered like shingles. A greenish, squishy, surprisingly effective roof that absorbs heat, deadens wind, and provides a breeding ground for exactly 1 million different types of fungus. You glance up at the ceiling again, still streaked with soot, and feel a drip land just behind your ear. Roof sweat. You've stopped reacting. Everything is damp, and you're pretty sure your blanket has developed a second ecosystem. But here's the weird thing, it works. For all its smell, mess and medieval charm, this insulation keeps the longhouse relatively stable. Outside, the wind howls like an angry spirit. Inside, it's just sort of tolerably miserable. And that's a win. People didn't just throw these houses together. Viking builders were annoyingly clever. The longhouse is shaped like a boat flipped upside down, narrow and curved at the top. This isn't because they were lazy and just reused ship blueprints. It's because that shape is sturdy, sheds snow and naturally supports weight. And when snow piles onto the roof, even better. It insulates. Nature's heavy freezing blanket. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders. It's made from thick, woven wool, scratchy but warm, and smells faintly of smoke and wet dog. You shift a bit, making room as someone comes to sit beside you, pulling their own cloak tightly across their chest. Their boots are rimmed with fur, possibly fox, possibly something less pleasant. Everyone wears layers, not one or two, but 5, sometimes 6, all piled awkwardly. Tunics, trousers, cloaks, hoods, mittens, all of it made from wool, fur or leather that's been through a few too many winters already. You notice the children wrapped up like overstuffed sausages, waddling around the longhouse floor with stiff arms and blanket cocoons. They look like tiny walking bedrolls. One trips and lands in a pile of straw completely unbothered. No one rushes to help. Falling is part of the routine. No one has energy to panic anymore unless there's fire or blood. The weirdest thing, all this works better than you'd expect. You might not be toasty, but you're not dead. That's the bar here. Here's something a bit off the beaten path. Some archaeological finds suggest that Viking homes were occasionally lined with animal pelts, not just for decoration or warmth, but also as windbreakers. Imagine living in a house wallpapered with fur. Not faux fur, actual fur, wolves, bears, whatever was unlucky enough to get caught. And don't even get started on the floor. Straw, moss, hay, all changed regularly if you were conscientious, or never if you weren't. You learn to sleep lightly, especially if the rats are bold. Now, there is some debate among historians about just how effective this insulation was. Some argue that longhouses stayed above freezing even during the coldest months. Others think that's wishful thinking, pointing out that without chimneys or radiant heating, most warmth dissipated before it could truly cozy the space. The truth's probably somewhere in between. These people didn't aim for comfort. They aimed for not being frostbitten before breakfast. You watch as one of the older boys walks toward the door, wrapped in layers and still shivering. He lifts the heavy wooden latch, cracks the door open, and boom, cold air barrels in like a freight train. Everyone hisses in unison. He winces and quickly steps out, slamming it shut behind him. Outside, chores still exist. Livestock needs checking. Snow needs shoveling off the thatch before it collapses under its own passive-aggressive weight. Someone nearby groans and pulls a woolen cap down over their face. They've got the right idea. The fewer skin cells you expose to air, the better. You lean back against the wall again, pulling your knees up to your chest and adjusting the fur-wrapped bundle at your feet. Inside it, the warmest boots you own and the secret to surviving nights in a longhouse without central heat. You wore them to bed, and you're not ashamed. Here's something small but weirdly endearing. Some households would line their sleeping spaces with birch bark. Not just because it looked rustic, but because it's waterproof, mold-resistant, and acts as a natural bug repellent. You mentally add birch bark to the short list of things you now irrationally love, alongside peat, soot, and the occasional warm goat. You close your eyes for a moment. The longhouse breathes around you, creaks, cracks, the sigh of people adjusting their cloaks, the soft crunch of someone chewing something that's probably dried fish. The fire crackles low, the wind howls again, but you're wrapped in wool surrounded by turf and timber, pressed close to the warmth of a dozen other equally tired humans. It's not luxurious, it's not Instagrammable, but it's working. This whole place is a human thermos, carefully packed, sealed tight, and just barely managing to hold on to the heat. You realise it's not the fire that saves you, it's the insulation, the turf, the furs, the smoke-stained everything, the crowd of bodies, the smells you'll never forget. The design perfected not for aesthetics but for endurance. Still no fireplace, still not dead. That's enough. You haven't seen the sun in 3 days, maybe 4, though it's hard to tell when the sky just sort of fades from midnight black to charcoal grey, and then back again without offering anything as helpful as a sunrise. But time doesn't stop just because the sun can't be bothered. You're still waking up in the longhouse every morning, still peeling yourself off the straw bedding like a slightly used piece of parchment, and still trying not to accidentally step on the goat that insists on sleeping a little too close to your knees. You know what no one told you about surviving Arctic winters with the Vikings? You don't do it alone. You don't get a cosy little bedroom with a fur rug and a personal fireplace. You get this: 20 people in one long, smoky room, and not an inch of personal space. Sleeping arrangements? Think less tucked in for the night, and more human lasagna. Everyone piled side by side, tangled in wool blankets and animal hides, limbs overlapping, breath mingling in the icy air, and someone's foot somehow always ending up in your armpit. You wake up sandwiched between two people who snore in harmony, one deep and steady like a mountain rumbling, the other wheezing like an old bellows in a blacksmith's last week on the job. You're pressed so tightly together that their body heat has become your body heat. You don't even flinch when one of them coughs directly into your hair. You're used to it now. In fact, you're grateful. Warm lungs, even diseased ones, are better than cold air and certain death. And here's the kicker: you're also sleeping with livestock. Not metaphorically, literally. There's a pig nearby, curled up like a grumpy old dog. A few chickens roost on an overhead beam, feathers occasionally floating down like nature's dandruff. A calf born just before the first snow lies swaddled in a blanket, its breath steaming out like a tiny dragon. These animals aren't in here because you're emotionally attached. They're here because they're warm. That's how Viking families survived the winter, by turning their homes into live-in full-body heating systems. A fire helps, sure, but body heat is the real MVP. Your body, the baby's body, the old man who never bathes, doesn't matter. It all goes into the communal oven of survival. You, your siblings, your cousins, your in-laws, the goat and the rooster, with a personal vendetta against sleeping past dawn, all sharing space, warmth, and quite possibly lice. Which brings us to bedding. It's not exactly memory foam. You're lying on a patchwork of old furs, flattened straw, and whatever cloth scraps could be spared from clothing repair. Some families sew together sacks and stuff them with moss. Others just curl up on thick rugs of woven wool and let their backs get used to being angry all the time. If you're lucky, your little corner of the sleeping area hasn't been peed on by a toddler or a goat in the past 24 hours. If you're really lucky, the straw is fresh. Ish. There's an old man across the room, you've heard him called Eric One Ear, who claims he once slept outside, wrapped in sealskin, for an entire week just to prove a point during a family argument. The story changes every time he tells it, but the takeaway is always the same. Cold is survivable if you know how to respect it, and a grudge will keep you warm longer than any fire. You glance toward the hearth. The fire's low again, barely more than a glow. Someone will feed it soon, but no one rushes. Energy is currency in here, and people spend it carefully. The longer you lie still, the less heat you lose. The fewer chores you do, the fewer calories you burn. The fewer calories you burn, the fewer bowls of watery stew you need to make it through the week. It's a delicate balancing act of inactivity and survival. Now, the Vikings weren't just being primitive for the fun of it. Their strategy worked. Historians and archaeologists have uncovered longhouse layouts showing sleeping benches built into the sidewalls, elevated slightly to avoid the cold seeping up from the frozen ground. People would curl into these alcoves, pack themselves together like sardines, and pull layers of wool and fur over their heads to trap every possible wisp of body heat. There are even theories that the animals had designated sleeping spots inside the longhouse, carefully arranged to maximise warmth without stepping directly into fresh manure every morning. Theories, not guarantees. And let's not ignore the quirky side of all this. Some Norse families believed in the power of dream sharing. Sleeping together, they thought, could merge dreams, allowing people to experience the same visions. Whether it was true or just something you say to your kids when they wake up crying in the middle of a pitch-black winter night, who knows? But in this setting, huddled like embers in a dying fire, it feels oddly possible. That said, not everyone agrees on exactly how cosy these arrangements were. Some scholars think people took turns sleeping near the hearth, rotating for fairness. Others argue that hierarchy ruled everything, even sleeping positions. The eldest or highest ranking got the warmest spots. The youngest, poorest or newest members of the household, they got the wall, you know, the one with frost on it. You reach up and feel the condensation that's collected along the timber. It's slick, cold and a little grimy, still better than frostbite. Your feet, buried in a tangle of fur and blanket, are starting to feel almost okay. You flex your toes, nothing breaks off. Progress. Someone sneezes, loudly. Half the room groans. A child giggles. The goat farts. This is winter survival Viking style. Not a solo struggle against nature, but a messy, overcrowded, borderline unhygienic group project where the prize is simply staying alive until the snow melts. No fireplaces, no hot cocoa, no personal space. Just warmth stolen from bodies, stolen from beasts, and guarded like treasure. And you curled in your blanket, shoulder to shoulder with people who smell like wood smoke and wet wool, realise something. For all the discomfort, the smoke, the flatulence, and the uninvited chickens, you're still alive, still warm enough, still here. And that really is the whole point. Your stomach growls before your eyes even open. Not a gentle grumble, more like a long, hollow moan from the depths of your ribcage. A symphony of empty bellies follows across the longhouse. A collective hunger choir. That's how mornings start out here. Not with coffee, not with birdsong, but with a reminder that you're running on stew fumes and salted fish dreams. Welcome to the Viking diet, winter edition. You sit up slowly, trying not to knock over the bucket of last night's dishwater someone left just inches from your bedding. You swear that thing's on a mission to kill you. Across the room, a woman, Brynhild again, sits at the edge of the hearth, stirring something in a pot that smells vaguely edible. Definitely meaty. Possibly fishy. Possibly both. You try not to overthink it. Let's be clear, this isn't a culinary adventure. This is fuel management. Winter food wasn't about flavour. It was about survival. And fat was your best friend. Butter, lard, whale blubber if you lived far enough north. Whatever got stored up during the warmer months now becomes the primary way to keep your insides from freezing. Bread? Maybe, but only the hard, dried stuff that could double as a good roof tile. Fresh vegetables? Not unless you count onions and the occasional turnip that somehow dodged rot. Fruit? Try dried berries soaked in vinegar, and manage your expectations. Breakfast today is a stew. You peer into the pot as Brynhild lifts the lid and lets out a gust of steam so potent it instantly makes your eyes water. Inside, fatty chunks of some kind of meat, probably seal, possibly sheep, floating among soggy root vegetables, old barley, and a suspicious amount of grease. She ladles some into a wooden bowl and hands it to you with the kind of grace only someone who's ladled 40,000 bowls of stew in their lifetime can muster. You blow on it, take a bite, and yeah, it's hot. It's salty. It coats your mouth like a wool sock soaked in broth. But it's calories, and that's all that matters. Here's a fun historical nugget. Vikings didn't just survive on meat and grain. They were big fans of preserved food. Think smoked everything. Smoked fish, smoked lamb, smoked seal, even smoked cheese, if it could be dried, salted, or buried in the ground long enough to terrify a modern health inspector. It became winter rations. Preservation wasn't optional, it was an art. And every household had their own techniques, passed down like grim family secrets. You'd think burying meat in lye would ruin your appetite. Turns out, after a week of snow and silence, lutefisk starts to look romantic. And while we're at it, let's talk drinking. You're sipping hot broth now, sure, but come nightfall, chances are there's going to be some form of alcohol involved. Mead, ale, fermented berry wine, whatever could be brewed before the freeze set in. Not to get drunk necessarily, but to get warm. Liquid courage meets liquid insulation. Plus, after sharing a bed with 6 people and a goat, you've earned it. You set the bowl down and wipe your mouth with the edge of your sleeve. It smells like smoke and fish oil and someone else's fingers, but it gets the job done. Across the room, a couple of kids are gnawing on dried meat strips, chewing so slowly, it looks like it's less about eating and more about distracting themselves from existing. You remember being that age. Winter felt longer then. Now it just feels heavier. One of the older men, Tormund, with the permanent squint, talks about the seal hunt from last season, how they caught 5 in one day and used every single part. The meat was eaten, the fat rendered for lamps and waterproofing. The skins turned into cloaks and boots, even the bones became tools. Nothing went to waste, couldn't afford to. Out here, waste was just a slow form of suicide. Someone nearby grumbles that they're tired of stew. Brynhild doesn't look up. Wait until we run out of stew, she mutters. That ends the conversation. Now, there's still debate among scholars about just how balanced the Viking winter diet was. Some argue that they suffered from scurvy and other vitamin deficiencies due to lack of fresh food. Others believe fermented vegetables and nutrient-dense fish oils kept them surprisingly healthy. Archaeological remains show evidence for both. You don't really care about the scholarly argument right now. You're just hoping there's still some goat butter left in the storage pit. Speaking of which, those pits, they're critical. Dug deep into the frozen ground, often lined with stone or wood, and covered to keep the frost out, they act as prehistoric refrigerators. You've seen them. Inside, meat wrapped in linen or animal hide, root vegetables stacked like treasure, and clay pots of fermenting milk that smell like bad decisions and foot fungus. You don't want to look at them too long. Just take what you need and close the lid before something crawls out. You finish your stew. It wasn't great. It wasn't even really good. But you're warmer now. Your belly feels less like an icy cavern and more like a lukewarm cave, and that counts. You lie back on your fur bedding and stare up at the smoky rafters. There's a strip of dried fish hanging there, swaying slightly with the draft. It's been there for weeks, maybe months. No one's claimed it yet. You make a mental note. If things get bad, really bad, that fish is yours. There's something beautiful about the simplicity of it all, horrifying too, but beautiful in that quiet, gritty Viking way. You eat what you have, you share what you must. You ration the seal fat and pass the bowl. No one's overeating, no one's complaining. Okay, one person's complaining, but they are always complaining. That's their role now. And in the middle of it all, there's you, a little warmer, a little fuller, a little more likely to make it through another day of the dark season. Still no fireplace, but you've got stew, you've got fat, and against all odds, you've still got your appetite. You spend the better part of the morning trying to convince your cloak to behave. It's stiff in the cold, smells like smoke, and every time you shift, it tugs at your tunic like an annoyed toddler. You drape it over your shoulders anyway, pull the hood low, and settle into your spot near the wall, huddled between a stack of folded wool and someone who may or may not have stolen your mittens last week. At this point, it's hard to tell where your clothing ends and someone else's begins, but at least you're dressed. And in the Arctic winter, that's not nothing. Let's talk about your clothes. Layered, itchy, incredibly flammable, and the only thing keeping you from becoming a cautionary icicle. You're wearing more wool than a 1990s sweater convention. Your inner tunic is coarse, woven from thick sheep's wool that hasn't seen the inside of a washing basin in weeks. Over that, another tunic, this one heavier, patchworked from old scraps, with the seams pulled tight where they've been resewn 3 or 4 times. Trousers, you've got 2 pairs on, both equally reluctant to bend at the knees. It feels less like you're walking and more like you're waddling in fabric armour. Then there's the outer layer, your wool cloak, the MVP of winter fashion and function. It's pinned at the shoulder with a brooch that looks handmade and slightly menacing, like someone carved it in a fit of boredom and rage. The cloak is heavy, made from thick, felted wool and lined with fur at the collar. You'd kill for more fur, but fur's for people who can trade, or who are particularly good at hunting, or who inherited it from someone important enough to freeze in style. Your boots are stuffed with straw. Real straw. You pull them on and feel the crunch, hear the whisper of dry stalks between your toes, and wiggle until they settle into place, you see. It's weirdly comforting. You don't think about fashion anymore. You think about warmth. And if that means straw in your socks and goat hide wrapped around your shins, so be it. And speaking of goat hide, there's a very real possibility that your mittens used to be part of the goat you had soup from last month. Waste not, want not. Nothing goes unused, especially not in winter. Leather thongs double as belt and bootlace. Fur scraps become ear flaps. Old linen, that's a scarf now. You start eyeing someone's tunic hem like it might make a decent neck wrap. That's how far it's gotten. But the real unsung hero of Viking winter wear is wool. Not that cosy dyed stuff with snowflakes knitted into it. We're talking raw, scratchy, lanolin-soaked wool. The kind that smells faintly of sheep long after the sheep is gone. Viking wool was woven tightly, sometimes felted to make it thicker, and occasionally waterproofed with fat or fish oil. You've rubbed so much fat into your sleeves they shine like a roasted ham. And it works. That sheen? That's the thin, greasy barrier between you and hypothermia. Here's a quirky little historical detail. Some Viking garments were believed to be enchanted, with protective runes stitched into the seams. You haven't seen any magic today, unless you count the way your left mitten finally dried out after being dropped in the hearth water bucket. But people did believe in the power of symbols. A small sewn rune on a cloak could mean protection, warmth, maybe even luck, because sometimes survival is just about believing your sleeve is doing its job. You pull your hood further over your face and lean against the wall. Around you, others are doing the same. No one moves too much. Movement wastes heat. It also encourages your layers to shift, and once cold air sneaks in through the gaps, it's like being licked by a frozen eel. So everyone sits in wool-wrapped silence, half asleep, half conscious, in that winter trance where nothing moves and nothing needs to. But let's not pretend the clothing situation was flawless. Scholars still argue about how well Vikings really kept warm in these extreme conditions. Some believe the wool and fur layering system was remarkably effective, simple but brilliant. Others argue that even with 5 layers, you'd never quite be warm, just slightly less cold. It's an ongoing debate with no clear winner, but you have a feeling both sides would agree that it beats the alternative, being naked in Norway in January. Children scurry around, little bundles of wool and fur, their feet wrapped in extra cloth tied with sinew. One girl has mittens that nearly reach her elbows. Another wears a hat that might have started life as a fox, complete with ears still attached. You smile faintly. Kids are better at adapting. They don't complain, don't question. They just pull on another layer and keep moving. A young boy tosses a bundle of dried moss onto the fire. It flares up, catching the end of someone's too long cloak. There's a scramble and a shout, a bit of stomping, and then quiet again. The cloak is singed, but salvageable. Everyone settles back into their corners, and the silence returns. Wool is warm, yes, but it's also extremely flammable. One stray ember and you're a walking torch, so you learn to sit carefully, you learn to move slowly, and you learn that nothing screams bad luck louder than the smell of burning mittens. Outside, the wind claws at the walls, begging to come in. You picture it, swirling around the house like a hungry wolf, teeth bared, waiting for one loose plank, one open flap of hide, one child who forgets to latch the door. But it's not getting in. Not today. You're bundled, wrapped, layered like a cabbage in boots. And here's the final charm of it all. When you strip off your clothes at the end of the night, assuming it's not too cold to even try, you still smell like the longhouse, like smoke, like dried fish, like damp wool and old fat, and the lingering hope that spring isn't just a cruel hallucination. But for now, you're dressed, and you're warm enough. That's the bar, that's the goal, that's Viking fashion, survival, but make it scratchy. Still no fireplace, still not stylish, but still not frozen. The longhouse is darker than usual this evening. Not night dark, just that dim, grainy twilight that feels like you're living inside a candle stub. The kind of darkness where shadows linger longer than they should, and corners blur into the background like the house itself is trying to disappear. You blinked a few times to clear your eyes, but no, it's just the same old lack of light you've grown weirdly accustomed to. You could probably walk this place blindfolded by now. Honestly, some days it feels like you are. There's no fireplace to gather around. Still, no big stone hearth glowing merrily. No roaring flames to light up the walls and dance shadows across faces. Instead, the room flickers with the dull, greasy glow of oil lamps, small bowls of fish oil or animal fat with a bit of twisted fabric for a wick. One of them is set on a low shelf beside the hearth. It sputters as someone leans too close to you, sending a wave of the worst smell you've experienced since that pickled egg disaster 2 weeks ago. Rancid fish and hot wax. It's like your nose is being punished. But these lamps are essential. There's no such thing as letting your eyes adjust when the only light source is a blob of smoking tallow floating in a rock. If you want to see your food, your tools, or your own hands, you need a lamp, or 3. But oil is precious, and so is fat, so the rule is simple. Use just enough to not go blind or walk into the goat. That's it. You move carefully across the room, sidestepping fur bundles and firewood scraps. There's a small alcove where someone's set up a spinning station. Not for fun, mind you. There are no hobbyists in here. Spinning wool into thread is work, daylight or no daylight. The woman seated there works by lamplight. Her fingers nimble, her face a mask of quiet concentration. You watch the way the thread glistens in the dim light, silver and soft, like spider silk if spiders were freezing and miserable. And here's a weird detail. Sometimes, instead of stone lamps, they'd just slice a long strip of fat and set it on fire. That's it. Just a flaming strip of animal. It sounds like a joke, but it worked. Slower burn, longer light. Was it smoky? Absolutely. Did it smell like the god's armpit? Yes. But when you've got 18 hours of darkness, you stop being picky. You settle beside one of the wall benches and reach into your bag for your knife. You keep it wrapped in cloth. tucked next to a bundle of half-dried sinew and a pouch of salt. Everything stored with care, because if you lose something in this light, you might never find it again. One wrong step and it vanishes into the shadows between straw and dirt. You've already lost a spoon that way. It still haunts you. You flip the blade slowly in the low light, checking for rust. It's fine, but you need something to do. Everyone here has a job during the dark hours. Some mend clothes, some sharpen blades, some carve little wooden charms or patch holes in leather boots. It's a quiet hive of slow-moving industry, like a factory powered by silence and body odour. No one speaks much. You just hear the occasional cough, the creak of wood, the faint crackle of the hearth, and the soft flicker of those little flames fighting to stay alive. There's a story told among the elders, probably made up but told with absolute seriousness, about a family who ran out of oil in the deep of winter. They tried to make do with frozen animal fat, but it wouldn't catch, so the father supposedly fashioned a new lamp using his own boot, stuffing it with hair and grease scraped from the cooking pot. It worked, just barely, and the moral, depending on who tells it, is either always ration your oil or never underestimate a desperate man's creativity. Probably both. You glance up and spot a smudge on the wall where an old lamp once sat, scorched into the timber like a little sunburn. It's charred and cracked, a permanent reminder of how close the line is between light and disaster. Fire is comfort, fire is death. Viking houses were dry. The straw, the wood, the thatch. One spark too bold, and the whole structure could go up like a bonfire made of regrets. That's why these lamps are so small, so low, why they're spaced apart. Why someone, usually one of the sharper grandmothers, keeps an eye on them like they're misbehaving children. You've seen her slap a hand away from a lamp before. Too close, she muttered. Want to die warm and screaming? Point made. So you learn to love the dark, to live in it, to see the world through flickering half-light and learn which shapes are dangerous and which are just a bundle of furs. You adapt. It's not scary anymore, just slow, soft, like being wrapped in an old story that no one remembers the beginning of. You wonder if the world outside is still there, if the trees are still covered in snow, if the sky is still a curtain of grey, but you don't go outside now unless you must. The lamps are enough. They make your world small and manageable. This room, these faces, these smells, awful, persistent and weirdly comforting. And here's where the scholars get divided again. Some argue that Vikings didn't struggle too much with darkness because they were simply used to it. Others believe seasonal depression hit them hard just as it does now, but they had no language for it. No concept of mental health, just a quiet dread that crept in around week 4 of endless twilight. Either way, you can feel it, the weight of it, the slow grind of time passing in near total shadow. One of the children laughs. It's sudden and sharp, cutting through the gloom like a spark. Someone had been telling a joke, apparently. You missed the setup, but the punchline was effective. You smile a little. It feels strange on your face, like your muscles forgot how to do it. You shift, the lamplight catching the edge of your cloak. There's a tiny embroidered rune near the hem, just a single loop and spike stitched in red thread. You hadn't noticed it before. Maybe it's for luck, maybe it's just decoration. Either way, it glows faintly in the light. A reminder that even in a place without brightness, someone once thought to add beauty. Still no fireplace, still no light switch. But the lamps burn on, and for now, so do you. Time moves differently inside the longhouse. Not slower exactly, but sideways. Days bleed into nights, nights into more nights, and at a certain point, you stop asking what day it is and start measuring time by stew thickness and who last turned the drying meat. You can feel the world shrinking around you, the way the walls feel closer, the fire smaller, and everyone's voice is quieter. You're not bored. Not really, you're just paused. Like someone hit the freeze button on your life and forgot to unfreeze it. And this, right here, is the real test of winter. Not just surviving the cold, but surviving the nothing. No farming, no raiding, no fishing unless you're suicidal. The ocean's locked under ice and the boats are buried under snow. Even the animals are doing the bare minimum. The chickens just sit in corners, puffed up like grumpy feather bags. The goats stare out the door flap like they're reconsidering all their life choices. So what do you do when there's nothing to do? You sit, you wait, you mend, you talk sometimes. And if you're lucky, someone tells a story. Tonight, an elder starts talking. He's old enough that no one's really sure if his tales are fact or fever dreams. But it doesn't matter. His voice is low and gravelly, cracked like gold wood, and the lamplight catches the curve of his nose just right. You settle in, arms folded, chin tucked to your chest. The others lean closer too, not because they're excited, but because it beats staring at the wall and listening to your own teeth click. The story's about trolls, because of course it is. Not the kind in fairy tales, these are the old trolls, the ones that live in the mountains and steal the warmth from your bones if you look at them wrong. There's a part about a girl who walks into the woods during midwinter and comes back with hair made of icicles and a voice that only speaks backwards. Someone chuckles, someone else mutters that he's told this one before. He keeps going anyway, and that's the thing. Stories don't need to be new, they just need to exist, they give shape to the days. You start to know them like old friends. The fox bride, the buried warrior, the island of endless sun. Even if you've heard them 50 times, even if you know how they end, you still listen. You lean into the voice, let the rhythm of the tale wrap around your brain like a second blanket. Others join in. Someone else begins braiding their child's hair and adds a detail to the troll story, a wolf that guarded the girl maybe. Another pipes up with a different ending, one where the trolls turn into birds and fly away. It's all nonsense, glorious, necessary nonsense. And let's be honest, there's only so much spinning, carving or mending you can do before your fingers seize up or you accidentally sew your sleeve shut. Storytelling becomes the glue that holds your frozen sanity together. Here's something quirky. Vikings loved riddles. Not just goofy jokes, but full-blown philosophical riddles disguised as insults. Imagine a 12-year-old challenging a 70-year-old to a battle of wits using only metaphor. It happened. A lot. They'd gather in the evening, just like this, and swap kennings, clever turns of phrase that meant everything and nothing at once. A whale road wasn't a road, it was the sea. A battle sweat wasn't sweat, it was blood. Language was their entertainment system, and it came without batteries. You try one on the man beside you. What is the sword's sibling, born in fire and drowned in salt? He blinks at you, chews his lip, then mutters, "A whetstone?" You shake your head. No, a blacksmith's tongue. He groans. You win. The child with the fox hat starts humming. Not a song really, just a sound, a high, reedy melody that loops like it's been stuck in their throat all winter. And the oddest thing? It fits. The room hums with it. The fire crackles. The old man's voice grows softer. You close your eyes and feel it. A long exhale of human presence, holding the cold at bay with the power of shared boredom. There's a growing body of scholarly debate about how important oral storytelling was during the Viking winter months. Some believe it was central to identity, how myths and family histories were preserved without writing. Others argue that it was just what you did when there was literally nothing else to do. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But here, in this low-ceilinged room that smells like smoked goat and old socks, you're starting to think it mattered more than people realised. Because otherwise you're just waiting. For spring, for warmth, for the wind to stop sounding like a wolf with asthma, and waiting without meaning is just slow death. So you fill the silence with words, some true, some not. Some that make people laugh, some that make them stare into the fire and go quiet for a while. And when the story ends, no one claps. That's not how this works. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters about needing to check the drying rack. The room settles again into its low buzz of quiet tasks and muffled rustling. You stretch out your legs, feel the weight of your cloak, and let your mind wander through the half-light and flickering shadows. You think maybe, if you could bottle this moment, the warmth of nearby bodies, the soft murmur of an old man's tale, the way the fire hisses as someone adds another bit of moss, you'd never be afraid of winter again. Still no fireplace, still no escape, but you've got stories now, and stories burn longer than wood. You're trying not to think about it, but eventually nature calls, and it's not the poetic kind. You've ignored the signs for hours, hoping your body would forget it ever had a bladder. But now, as the longhouse slips into one of its quieter, sleepier moments, the reality sinks in. You're going to have to go. And not figuratively, like physically get up, leave the vaguely warm embrace of the smoky huddle, and step outside into the dark, wind-slapped, frost-bitten nothingness that passes for a bathroom out here. There's no polite way to put this, so let's not pretend. Using the toilet in a Viking winter settlement is a full-on survival challenge. There's no outhouse. Not really. Not unless someone had the time, energy, and luxury to dig a pit and box it in before the ground froze solid. Even then, It's not much more than a glorified wooden shed with a hole and a prayer. And most of the time, especially in smaller communities, people just made do. That's right, you're about to go medieval. Literally. You wrap your cloak tight, tuck your mittens under your arms for warmth and brace yourself as you approach the door. You try to be quiet, hoping no one notices and offers a sarcastic good luck on your way out. Too late. Someone coughs from the shadows. Mind the wind, they mutter. Yeah, thanks. The cold hits like a wall. Your breath instantly fogs into a solid mist and your eyes water on impact. You blink against the sting and step outside, boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. The sky is a deep charcoal, speckled with a few visible stars that seem to flicker more out of pity than presence. The wind, always the wind, slashes at your face like it's trying to peel your cheeks off. You pull your hood lower and trudge a few paces into the darkness. You find your usual spot, a patch of frozen earth behind a half-collapsed fence. There are other signs of use here too. A patch of trampled snow, some straw scattered strategically. It's all very rustic. You crouch quickly before you lose circulation in your legs. Everything about this moment is terrible. Every single second outside feels like a punishment for being born with organs. There's a strange quiet that comes with this kind of exposure, though. The air is deadly still, except for the distant creak of the longhouse settling and the sharp crack of a tree limb snapping somewhere deep in the woods. You glance toward the tree line. You don't want to believe in monsters, but honestly, if one came crawling out of the woods right now, you just nod and accept it. You hurry back inside as fast as dignity allows. When you open the longhouse door, a wave of thick, smoky air wraps around you like a damp rug. It's awful. It's heaven. You breathe it in like soup, reeking and familiar. You stamp your boots a little too loudly, and a few heads stir in the dimness. Someone snickers, you pretend not to hear. Let's be honest, sanitation isn't the strong suit of Arctic Viking life. Waste is handled with the same strategy as most things. Remove it from the centre of the group and forget about it until it becomes a problem. Chamber pots exist, sure, but those fill fast and freeze faster. Some people use buckets, some use corners. Some, particularly the old or the very young, just don't bother making it outside. You learn to avoid certain spots in the longhouse, especially when it's too dark to see clearly. If you're clever, you spread a little straw there and pretend nothing happened. Here's a surprisingly quirky historical fact. In some Viking settlements, archaeologists have uncovered what appear to be rudimentary toilets. Long, narrow trenches lined with stone and covered with wooden planks, usually placed downhill from the house. They weren't luxurious, but they were a step up from the find a bush and hope method. These trenches were often located close to pigsties, which makes sense in the worst possible way. Pigs are nature's little garbage disposals. And, well, let's just say they weren't picky. The debate over Viking hygiene habits gets heated in academic circles. Some scholars argue that Norse people were surprisingly clean for their time, bathing regularly in warmer months and using combs and tweezers made from bone. Others insist that winters brought a steep drop-off in hygiene standards. With limited water access, frozen wash basins, and the sheer effort it took to do anything involving soap and cold fingers, personal cleanliness was, at best, seasonal. You slump back down into your fur pile, now slightly colder and infinitely grumpier. You pull your cloak tight and try not to think about the logistics of this entire operation. Your hands are still icy, and your cheeks sting where the wind touched them. The fire pit in the centre glows faintly, but no one's added fuel in a while. Everyone's half asleep again, the kind of sleep where you're more unconscious than restful, stuck between dreams and stiff muscles. Across the room, a toddler starts to fuss. His mother groggily pulls him into her lap and wraps a blanket around them both. He's likely wet himself, and she's already going through the motions of replacing the linen. You admire her quiet efficiency. She doesn't speak, doesn't sigh, just does what needs to be done. That's the rhythm of the winter life. Things happen. You clean them. You move on. Complain too loudly and you'll be volunteered for night watch. The fire hisses as someone finally stirs to poke it. A small stick, some crumbling peat, a few cinders flaring back to life. You watch the tiny flames fight the darkness, and for a moment, you forget how terrible your frozen bathroom adventure was. You're back inside, you're not dead, and even though your boots still smell faintly suspicious, you're warm enough to sleep again. There's a small miracle in that. Still no fireplace, still no toilet, but at least you didn't freeze your rear to a rock. There's a quiet thud in the middle of the night, a sound that doesn't belong. You're not fully awake, but your body notices before your brain catches up. The longhouse has its usual symphony: creaking timber, fire crackling, An occasional goat sigh, someone snoring like their lungs are haunted. But this is different. You blink, adjust your hood, and peer across the shadowy room until your eyes settle on the source. A small figure curled on the floor just beside a sleeping bench. It's one of the children, not yours, but close enough. A girl, maybe 4 or 5 winters old, she's slumped sideways, blanket half kicked off, cheeks pale in the flickering light. You hear her breathing, ragged, shallow, like each inhale is a decision she's not sure she wants to keep making. Her mother's already kneeling beside her, shaking her gently, whispering something too soft to catch. A few other adults stir, but no one rushes over. You all know that look, that sound. It's winter sickness. In Viking life, children were both everything and temporary. Beloved fiercely, yes, but with the quiet understanding that many wouldn't see their 10th year. Winter made no exceptions for the small or the sweet-faced. Infections festered. Fevers climbed fast. A bad chill. A burst of coughing. A day without appetite. These things could spiral before you even had time to prepare a burial shroud. The girl stirs slightly, eyes fluttering open just enough to focus on the shape of her mother. She tries to speak, but only manages a sound, part groan, part question. Her skin looks waxy, and your stomach knots. You've seen this before. Last year, the neighbour's youngest slipped away in the night just like this. 1 hour she was asking for more broth, and the next she was gone, face peaceful, body limp, as if the cold had simply reached in and pressed a quiet stop button. The mother lifts her, wrapping her in every bit of wool she can reach, tucking a fur over her head and cradling her near the hearth. Someone adds more peat to the fire. The flames swell, casting long shadows across the walls, but the light feels powerless now, bright, but not warm enough. Everyone pretends not to watch, though every glance in the room has shifted toward that corner, and this is what winter truly is. Not just cold and dark, but fragile. Everyone's body runs on borrowed energy, on thin meals and thick air. There's no doctor, no medicine beyond herbs and hope. You've got elderberry, if it hasn't spoiled, willow bark for pain, maybe honey if you're lucky and if no one dipped into it early. But most of your healing options involve keeping warm, staying still and waiting. Someone fetches a carved wooden bowl and fills it with steaming broth, not stew, just the clear top layer, skimmed and heated, and handed off carefully. The mother touches it to the girl's lips. A dribble runs down her chin. She doesn't swallow. There's no panic, oddly. No screams, no rushing for help. You all know the rules by now. Winter gives, winter takes. It's not fair, but it's predictable. That's the worst part. It's never a surprise when someone slips away. It's just a creeping dread that settles in around week 5 and makes a nest in your gut. You get used to scanning faces in the morning, checking for the breath, watching, hoping, bracing. Here's a historical gut punch. Infant and child mortality in the Viking Age was high, especially in colder regions. Archaeological evidence suggests nearly half of all children died before age 10. That's not to say people didn't love their kids, far from it. But love and loss walked hand in hand. Parents grieved, but they also moved forward. They had to. You bury a child at dawn and still need to fetch water by noon. You glance at the girl again. She's limp now, but not gone. Her eyes are closed, breathing shallow but rhythmic. Her mother hums softly, a tune you've heard 100 times before. One of those lullabies that's older than any of you, passed down without words, just sound. The fire pops gently, throwing orange onto her face, and you see a flicker of something, not life necessarily, but resistance. You pull your blanket tighter, suddenly aware of how thin your own skin feels. Not literally, metaphorically. The emotional insulation is starting to wear out. Every day the cold takes something else. Energy, warmth, appetite, hope. You pretend you're fine. Everyone does. But there's a hollow place inside now, carved out by worry and filled with stories you tell yourself so you can sleep at night. A man near the wall coughs, wet and deep. No one reacts. He's been coughing all week. Maybe it'll pass. Maybe he'll be next. You try not to make bets in your head, but you do. You wonder if you're on anyone's list. A quirky, slightly horrifying fact. Viking longhouses didn't have separate sick rooms. The sick stayed with the living, their moans and coughs becoming just another part of the winter soundtrack. There were no sterile linens, no isolation, just a hope that the smoke and herbs would keep the sickness from spreading too far. And if not, well, the longhouse has room for fewer bowls to fill. The fire burns a little stronger now, The girl hasn't moved again, but her mother hasn't stopped humming. A few people shift back into sleep, trying to ignore the heaviness in the air. You lie down, cloak pulled tight, back against the damp wood, and stare at the rafters until your eyes go blurry. It's always like this. Life hanging by a thread of wool and willpower. You sleep with one ear open, listening for the sound of someone breathing, or worse, the moment they stop, still no fireplace, still no medicine. But you hope, quietly, foolishly, stubbornly, that she makes it to morning. You wake to the sound of scratching, not loud, not threatening, just soft, rhythmic rustling, somewhere in the dark corner behind the feed sacks and old tools. At first, you think it's someone shifting in their sleep, maybe a goat rearranging itself. But then it happens again. Long, slow scratches, followed by a high-pitched squeak that instantly makes the hairs on the back of your neck do that thing where they try to warn you about nature's less charming houseguests. Congratulations, you have pests. It was only a matter of time. You knew this deep down. Where there's food, warmth, and soft things to gnaw on, there are going to be creatures. And in a Viking longhouse, you're not just sharing space with people and livestock. You're also hosting a winter convention for every rat, mouse, flea, and half-starved insect that managed to scurry inside before the first snow sealed the walls tight. You sit up slowly, eyes adjusting to the low orange glow of the fire. The scratching's stopped, but you're wide awake now, ears straining for the next clue. Across the room, someone snores. A dog's tail thumps against the floor. Somewhere nearby, the goat emits a sleepy bleat, like it too has had enough of this nonsense. You glance toward the meat shelf, trying to spot any signs of movement, but the shadows are deep and the grease-stained cloths hanging over the dried fish don't rustle. A tiny clatter. A pebble? A seed? You squint, heart doing that dumb thing where it acts like a rat is a personal threat. Then silence again. This is how it goes. Hours of near silence, punctuated by the occasional mystery scuffle. You're not alone in noticing. A few others stir and grumble. One man swears quietly and throws a shoe into the darkness. It lands with a thud and an indignant squeak. You all listen, holding your breath. Nothing. The shoe was probably ineffective, but at least it was therapeutic. Let's talk about your new roommates. The unofficial, highly unwelcome cohabitants of every Viking longhouse. Rats, mice, and fleas weren't just common, they were unavoidable. Once the door flap was sealed for winter, you were living in a sealed food container. Warm, cosy, packed with meat, grain, and furs. To a rodent, this place is a dream buffet. Crumbs, grease, feathers, forgotten bits of fish skin, they eat it all. And they were not shy, not even a little. And it gets better. Because with the rats and mice come fleas and lice. And they don't just live on the animals, they live on you. Under your layers, in your bedding, on your scalp. You scratch your arm and try not to think about it. The girl across from you is doing the same, dragging at her nails through her wool sleeve like she's fighting invisible demons. She probably is. People do what they can. You wash when possible, you shake out your clothes, you comb your hair with a bone comb that looks more like a torture device than a grooming tool. You sprinkle dried herbs in your bedding, lavender, juniper, whatever the season left you with. It smells nice, if nothing else. Some even smear a little fat on the legs of storage shelves, hoping the slick surface will keep rats from climbing. Doesn't always work. You've heard the elder say that pests are a sign of prosperity. No mice in a poor man's house, he once said, laughing into his sealskin mittens. You'd like to test that theory by emptying the grain bins and seeing how many friends stick around. But then you'd be cold and hungry, and the mice would still find a reason to stay. A quirky little historical fact. Some Viking homes had cats. Actual functional working cats, not pets with fancy collars, but hunters, guardians of the granary, mousers with purpose. In fact, Norse mythology holds cats in high regard. Freyja, the goddess of love and fertility, had a chariot pulled by 2 cats. Try telling that to the lazy tabby currently curled up near the hearth like a fuzzy baked potato. It twitches an ear. Not out of vigilance, but because someone sneezed too close. That said, not everyone could afford to keep a cat. They were valuable, both for their usefulness and for what they symbolised. So if you didn't have one, you made do. Traps, elevated storage, yelling, lots of yelling. Some tried hanging dried fish bones near entry points, hoping the smell would distract scavengers from the real food. Others just got used to sharing. There's a scholarly debate about how bad the pest problem really was. Some argue that Viking hygiene was significantly better than other parts of Europe at the time, citing the bone combs, washing basins, and evidence of grooming kits found in graves. Others point to parasite remains found in Viking latrine pits and say, nope, everyone was crawling with something. Your personal experience right now leans toward the latter. You settle back into your bedding, doing a casual scan of your surroundings. Your food pouch is tied tight and hung from a beam, not foolproof but better than nothing. Your blanket has been shaken, your sleeves tucked. Your boots, however, are suspect. You make a mental note to check them in the morning before sliding your feet in. There are few things worse than toe-to-toe contact with a terrified rodent. Someone nearby is quietly cursing. You recognise the tone. It's the "I've been bitten" tone. You don't ask. You just shift a little closer to the centre of the room toward the hearth, where the heat might dissuade most of the night's smaller guests. You hope. Maybe. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You adapt. After a few weeks, you stop flinching at rustling. You stop gasping at squeaks. You just fold it into the background, alongside the snoring, the wind, the fire, and the whisper of people muttering prayers in their sleep. You've survived harsher things, the cold, the dark, the stew with the questionable lumps. A mouse in your blanket is hardly the worst this winter has thrown at you. Still no fireplace, still no pest control, but you've got a sharp stick, a suspicious boot, and a grudging acceptance of your place in the ecosystem. You've almost forgotten what a full day's work feels like, till someone hands you a bundle of wool and a pair of dull shears and tells you the sleeves you're wearing aren't going to mend themselves. You stare at the tools, then at the unravelling seam near your elbow, then back at the tools again, as if hoping they'll develop hands and do the job for you. No such luck. Welcome to the unsung truth of Viking winters. There's always something to do, and most of it involves preventing your belongings from falling apart while you're still using them. Outside, the snow's knee-deep and crusted with ice. You haven't ventured out in 2 days except for, the necessary horrors. Inside, though, life churns on, one small task at a time. Someone's sharpening knives with a whetstone, someone else is patching boots with sinew thread. In the corner, 2 kids are unravelling a length of rope to salvage the fibres. The longhouse may be sealed against the outside world, but the chores don't freeze just because the weather's terrible. You settle cross-legged near the fire, which is smouldering more than burning, and try your best not to cut your thumb off. The wool is rough, stubborn, and smells faintly of something that once lived a very determined life. You pull the thread through slowly, grateful that whoever spun it didn't skimp on quality. A poorly spun thread snaps fast, and thread that snaps in the middle of a repair tends to get you yelled at by the nearest elder. There's a rhythm to the work now. Stitch, pull, knot. It's not exciting, it's not even particularly satisfying, but it's necessary. And that's winter's favourite word, necessary. You do things not because they bring joy, but because the alternative is frostbite, hunger, or a tunic that falls apart during a walk to the woodpile. Everywhere around you, people are moving through the same rituals. Mending, weaving, spinning, sewing. Winter is the season of hands, calloused, blistered, frozen hands that never stop. No one's planting, no one's harvesting. So the tools turn inward and into domestic crafts, into maintenance, into trying to hold everything together until the world thaws enough to let you do something again. You glance toward the loom near the back wall. It's tall, made of rough-hewn wood, and currently covered in a half-finished bolt of cloth. The woman working it is methodical, pulling and tightening with a kind of quiet ferocity, like she's in a battle of wills with the fabric. Maybe she is. Wool's a demanding partner. You watch the warp and weft build slowly, line by line, until the pattern starts to emerge. Simple, geometric, and endlessly repetitive. You wonder how many hours she spent on just this one project. Dozens? Hundreds? And here's the twist. Viking winter labour isn't just about survival. It's also, in a strange way, about time travel. Every stitch connects you to the people who came before. The same knots, the same weaves, the same grim determination. 1,000 winters ago, someone else sat exactly where you're sitting now, threading wool through holes and then trying to ignore the sound of someone sneezing in the corner. Now for a quirky historical aside, many Norse families believed that thread held symbolic power, that to weave or spin was to bind fate itself. In Norse mythology, the Norns, 3 supernatural women, wove the destinies of men and gods alike. Every twist of thread could represent a life, every knot a turning point. You pause with the thread in your hand and imagine for just a moment that what you're doing matters more than keeping your elbow warm. Someone mutters nearby, "The boy fixing the rope has tied a knot so tight he can't undo it." He tugs, grimaces, and eventually gives up and starts cutting around it. You know that feeling. Sometimes winter's like that, too tangled to fix, so you just snip and start fresh. Of course, there's also the debate about how much actual work Vikings did during winter. Some scholars argue that it was a season of rest, a chance to recover from the frenzy of farming, raiding or sailing. Others claim that winter was when the real work happened, the slow daily tasks that built the foundation for everything else. You're currently siding with the second group, mostly because your fingers hurt and your back is sore. You pause for a moment, stretching your arms. The mended sleeve isn't perfect, but it'll hold. You run your fingers over the seam. Not pretty, but serviceable. That's become the mantra for most things this winter. Your clothes, your food, your attitude. You're not thriving. You're not even particularly functional. You're serviceable. And that's good enough. The fire needs tending, so you rise stiffly and add a few peat chunks, careful not to smother the embers. They hiss and sigh like they're annoyed to be asked to do anything. You know the feeling. In the corner, someone begins working on a pair of bone needles. It's a slow process. Scraping, shaping, polishing. Each needle takes hours to make and seconds to snap if you push too hard. You remember breaking one last week and trying to hide it under your bedding before anyone noticed. Someone probably found it by now. No one said anything. That's another part of winter work. The small silent forgivenesses. You sink back into your spot, now with a new project. A bit of tattered cloth that needs reinforcing. You don't even remember what it's from. A sleeve, a tunic hem, you start stitching anyway. Better to do something. Better to keep your hands busy. Better to drown out the growing ache in your joints with the mechanical comfort of needle and thread. Outside, the wind howls. Not even dramatically, just persistently. A whine under the doorframe. A sigh through the roof beams, like the world itself is exhaling in exhaustion. You stitch another line. You don't look up. Still no fireplace. Still no break. But you've got work to do, and that means you're still part of the story. The air in the longhouse is thicker than usual tonight. Dense, warmish, and loaded with the unmistakable perfume of smoke, sweat, and something that might be boiled cabbage or might be despair. You blink slowly, nose tingling, eyes watering just enough to make you feel like you're in a constant state of emotional reflection. But no, it's just the smoke. It's always the smoke. You've been here long enough to notice things, like the fact that you still haven't seen anything resembling a fireplace. And now, for the first time, you're starting to really question that. Because after days of crouching by the hearth, half freezing, half suffocating, you start to wonder, wait, didn't castles have fireplaces? Weren't chimneys a thing? Why are we all stewing in this peat-fueled lung fog while our ancestors allegedly lived in warmth and comfort? That's the myth, isn't it? That people in the past had these grand glowing hearths to gather around. That everyone sat cross-legged by the fire while someone in robes stirred soup with a ladle the size of a child. But that wasn't the Viking way. Not here, not in the Arctic, not in a society that prioritised survival over aesthetics. The truth is, fireplaces weren't standard fixtures in Norse homes, not the enclosed stone-built kind we picture with mantles and flues. Those came much later, with the spread of chimney technology in the High Middle Ages. In the meantime, you had the central hearth, a smoky, shallow pit of coals right in the middle of the house, with the smoke just kind of figuring itself out. It's not that they didn't use fire. Of course they did. Fire was life, but it wasn't romanticised. It was small, efficient, and often just enough to keep you from turning into human jerky. Tonight, the hearth glows like an exhausted eye. It's been fed a mixture of dried peat, fishbone, ash, and a few scraps of driftwood someone bartered from the neighbour. The flame doesn't flicker so much as pout. The smoke, though, oh, it's thriving. It spirals up from the hearth in slow coils, then hits the low ceiling beams and spreads out like it's crashing on a couch it doesn't plan on leaving. The longhouse isn't built for smoke removal. There's no chimney, no hood, just a smoke hole in the centre of the roof ridge, a narrow gap that lets out more hope than heat. In theory, the smoke drifts up and slips out. In practice, it hangs around like an uninvited relative who brought a lot of opinions and refuses to take a hint. You wipe your eyes with your sleeve and lean back, trying to find the one spot where the air doesn't actively fight your lungs. It's not easy. If you sit low to the ground, it's colder, but the air's clearer. If you sit high on a bench or near the wall, you're warm, but you're also marinating in smoke. It's a choose-your-own adventure, and the prize is either frostbite or chronic coughing. Someone near the hearth starts hacking, a wet, rasping sound that lasts just a bit too long. No one flinches anymore. Coughs are part of the background noise, like goats, fire pops, and there's constant rustle of someone shifting under blankets. You clear your throat and feel the grit of ash stuck to the back of your tongue. Delicious. Now, here's a slightly grim historical tidbit. Scholars studying ancient skeletal remains from Norse sites have found evidence of respiratory damage, scarring in the ribs, signs of chronic bronchitis, and other lovely effects linked to prolonged smoke exposure. The Viking Age didn't come with warnings about indoor air quality. If you lived to 40 with most of your lungs intact, you were doing well. There's some scholarly debate too, about just how widespread the no-chimney design was. Some argue that wealthier homes, chieftains, traders, landowners, may have had rudimentary flues or raised vents that helped with airflow. Others believe even those were rare, and that smoky longhouses were just the norm. Either way, your lungs don't care about historical nuance. They just want a break. You glance toward the ceiling. The rafters are black with years, maybe decades of built-up soot. Charcoal streaks stain every beam, and fat drips from old oil lamps have left puckered dark spots on the wood. It's a living cave painting of survival. You wonder how many stories are hidden in those black marks, how many winters they've seen. Someone starts waving a cloak near the hearth, trying to push the smoke upward toward the hole. It's not exactly scientific, but it kind of helps. For a moment, the air clears enough to see the outlines of people's faces again. Cheeks flushed, eyes half-lidded, noses red and shiny. Everyone looks mildly glazed. You're pretty sure half the room is just in a light smoke-induced trance. A toddler burps in their sleep and rolls over. And here's a quirky fact for you. In some Norse settlements, they used layers of turf or seaweed not just for insulation, but also to intentionally slow down the smoke's escape. That's right, sometimes they wanted the smoke to hang around. Not in the yum let's breathe it in way, but in the smoke deters bugs, preserves meat, and discourages mold way. It was functional. Disgusting, but functional. You move toward the fire with your bowl of stew, hoping it's hot enough to burn off the soot that's already collected inside your throat. The steam helps, sort of, or you spoon it slowly, letting the warmth distract you from the fact that you're basically living in a giant incense stick made of peat and fish oil. There's no point complaining. This is just how it is. No fireplace, no chimney, no soft crackling of logs behind a grate. Just the hearth. Open, low, dangerous maybe, but it's what you've got. You shift back to your spot on the ground, pulling your blanket over your shoulders. Smoke curls over your face like a bored cat. You let your eyes close. You've gotten used to the sting, even started dreaming in grey. Still no fireplace, still no real escape from the smoke, but the fire burns and you're still here. There's something oddly peaceful about the way the smoke just lingers above your head now, like a lazy cloud that forgot how to be threatening. You watch it drift toward the roof ridge, where that miserable little smoke hole, more a suggestion than an actual opening, pretends to help. It doesn't, but it's trying, and frankly that's more than you can say for some of the people around here. You're lying flat tonight, back against the floor, staring up through the haze like you're waiting for divine intervention in the form of better ventilation. It's not coming. You've given up on breathing like a normal person and settled for short, shallow puffs. Just enough to stay conscious, not enough to get ambitious. Welcome to Viking winter. You're not so much alive as you are operating. At some point, you roll over and get a face full of fur. You cough, spit, and discover it's your own blanket, one that now carries the distinct texture of ash, wool, and despair. You try not to think about how often you've inhaled this exact mix over the past few weeks. Probably enough to have your lungs permanently outlined in soot. Maybe archaeologists will dig you up someday and marvel at how well preserved your respiratory damage is. The thing is, smoke isn't just annoying here, it's strategic. There's a method to the madness. Without a chimney or real ventilation, the smoke doesn't just fill the room for fun. It coats the wood, the beams, the meat hanging in strips above the hearth. That layer of grime, it keeps bugs out. It preserves food. It keeps mold at bay. It's insulation, antiseptic, and pest control all rolled into one invisible horror cloud. You sit up and squint through the murk, eyeing the half-dried fish hanging like ominous wind chimes above the fire. They drip fat occasionally, and when it hits the coals, it sizzles like a tiny battle cry. You're pretty sure that one piece has been hanging there for 2 weeks now. Someone keeps claiming it's not ready. Honestly, you think they're just waiting for it to develop its own religion. A young man nearby, Eric probably, starts poking at the hearth with a stick, trying to reposition the peat bricks so they burn hotter, without spitting back. You watch as the flames flare, then die down again. Nothing ever really catches anymore. Everything is damp, or frozen, or burned out. It's not even about making the fire hot, it's about making it just alive enough to boil something, heat a few rocks, or toast the edge of a crust that's more bone than bread. Here's something few people think about. Longhouses didn't really ventilate well on purpose. The slow leak of smoke through the roof also helped keep the interior warm. If too much escaped, so did the heat. So people just lived with it, adjusted, sat low, kept their heads down and squinted through the grey. No windows, no gaps unless you needed one, and no holes big enough to let in that vindictive Arctic wind. But here's where things get weird. You'd think everyone would just suffer in silence, and sure, some do, but others have turned it into a kind of competition, like this woman across from you, Astrid, maybe, who was taken to sitting directly next to the hearth, her face in the smoke like she's trying to prove a point. She doesn't blink, doesn't flinch, just spins wool as if her lungs aren't slowly being replaced with tar. You admire her commitment. You also suspect she no longer has the ability to taste food. You've tried every trick now, wetting the edge of your scarf and tying it over your mouth, holding your breath while cooking, leaning low to the ground like you're about to pounce on something. It all helps a little, but not enough. You're still living in a house where oxygen has to share space with yesterday's fire and someone's attempt at cooking dried fish stew. Someone sneezes. Loud. Wet. Everyone flinches, but not because of the sneeze. You just know what it means. Another head cold, another 5 days of that awful chest-rattling cough that echoes through the beams like a cursed lullaby. You swear you've started to recognise people by the pattern of their coughing. That's the new winter social currency. But let's throw in a quirky little fact while we're suffocating. Some Norse homes burned aromatic herbs in the hearth. Not for ritual, but for sheer self-preservation. Juniper, heather, even pine needles. Anything that might take the edge off the smell of burning dung and stagnant air. It's not exactly perfume, but it beats smelling like the inside of a sweaty boot. You tried burning a sprig of dried something once. It sizzled, smoked, and set off a goat panic that ended with a bucket being overturned and 2 bowls of soup lost forever. The scholar in you wonders if there's a better way. Could they have designed a flue system, raised the smoke hole, created cross-ventilation? But then you remember, they weren't thinking like architects. They were thinking like survivors. A little smoke damage was a fair price for not freezing to death. That's the trade-off. Always the trade-off. You lie back again, this time pulling your cloak halfway over your face to filter the air. It kind of works. Now you're just inhaling a mixture of wool fibres and your own breath. You close your eyes and try to let your mind drift. Not to anything specific. Just away from this room. Away from the constant sting in your throat and the taste of ash that never leaves. You think about summer. Not because you believe it's coming, but because the idea of wind that doesn't cut through you feels exotic now. You try to remember what fresh air even smells like. Grass, salt, rain. You'd settle for mud at this point. Still no fireplace, still no fresh air. But the fire's alive, the smoke is doing its job, and so somehow are you. So you've reached the point in winter where everyone starts getting just a little bit weirder. Not dangerously so, not yet, but the edges of politeness are fraying like an overused wool sock. The same faces, the same routines, the same stew, the same 7 goats that keep looking at you like they know something. It's wearing on you. You can feel it in your shoulders, your jaw, and especially in the way no one can seem to make eye contact without sighing first. Let's be honest. Humans aren't built to live in close quarters for this long, at least not without space to escape, a few doors to slam, or the blessed ability to take a walk without turning into a human icicle. But in this longhouse, privacy is a fantasy. It's one big room. You eat here, sleep here, cough here, argue here, and try very hard not to stab your cousin with a spindle because he chews too loudly. Today it starts with a small thing, a broken bowl, someone drops it. It hits the dirt floor with a thud and a crack, not even dramatic, but it's enough. There's a pause, everyone hears it. Everyone pretends not to look. And then someone mutters, "That was the last one with a flat bottom." Not angry exactly, just heavy. You glance up and see the woman who dropped it, Sigrid, just staring at the pieces. She doesn't Doesn't even flinch, she just quietly collects the shards, wraps them in cloth and tucks them under her bench like she's giving them a burial. No one says thank you, no one offers help. There's no spare bowl, she'll use someone else's when they're done eating. That's just how it goes now. Tension in the longhouse builds like smoke, slow, creeping and inescapable. It curls into your thoughts, it settles behind your eyes. Every sound is amplified, every whisper is suspicious. Every shuffle from the back of the room makes you turn your head a little too fast. That's the thing about Viking winters. When you're trapped indoors for months, small annoyances become personal betrayals. Someone singing the same tune under their breath suddenly sounds like a war cry. Someone's baby cries too long and you start imagining ways to build soundproof cradles out of peat and wishful thinking. And heaven help you if someone starts sharpening a blade too close to where you're trying to sleep. You begin noticing the pairings. Who gravitates toward whom? Who avoids eye contact, who's been sitting closer to the wall lately, bundled a little tighter, speaking a little less. There's a quiet feud brewing between the man who controls the salt ration and the woman who accused him, passive-aggressively, of seasoning her fish like a southerner. The insult isn't entirely clear, but the tone made it universal. And then there's them, the cousins who've been side-eyeing each other for weeks now. No one remembers what started it. A disagreement over firewood, a goat that wandered off and returned with someone else's collar. Whatever it was, it's been festering. Today one of them bumps into the other while passing the hearth. Not hard, not even emotionally, but the silence that follows is loaded. You hold your breath, waiting for the spark, but nothing happens. Just narrowed eyes and a jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. It's only a matter of time. Now, Viking culture wasn't exactly built on quiet conflict resolution. Feuds were common. Blood feuds, family feuds, long, drawn-out disputes that sometimes lasted generations. They had whole laws dedicated to what to do when someone insults your honour, steals your sheep, or accidentally kills your uncle with a misjudged axe throw. But in winter, in a sealed longhouse with no escape and very little dignity to spare, those feuds had nowhere to go. They simmered, boiled, sometimes exploded, but often they just lingered. That's almost worse. You start tiptoeing around each other. You speak in short sentences. You pretend not to notice when someone shifts their bedding 2 feet away from their brother and mutters something about not wanting to breathe the same air. You've heard a story, probably exaggerated, about a winter in another village where 2 brothers argued so much over a stolen cloak that they ended up building a divider down the middle of the longhouse. Not a wall, just a line of furs and barrels. Each stayed on their side, refused to share stew, and took turns at the fire like it was a game of territorial chess. Supposedly, by spring, neither of them remembered why they were mad, but they kept the divider anyway. Tradition. You get it now. You really do. There's even a historical theory that some longhouses were built with designated sections for different families or family branches, not just for organisation, but to prevent bloodshed during these long, slow months of claustrophobic silence. It's debated, of course, but when you look around now, at the way people arrange their bundles, at the invisible lines they've drawn, you start to believe it. You try not to get involved. You mind your own business. You offer your spoon without comment, share your blanket with whoever shivers most, and try not to take it personally when someone hisses at you for stepping too close to their drying boots. It's not about you, it's about winter. Still, you can't help feeling the weight of it all. The pressure, the crowding, the staleness in the air, not just from smoke but from emotion. The walls are soaked in it now. The laughter is forced. The silences are heavy. Everyone's just barely holding it together. You roll over and pretend to sleep. That's the new favourite hobby. Pretend sleeping. Eyes closed, body still, brain fully alert. It's easier than engaging. It saves you from conversations you don't want and chores you can't stand. Plus, if you're lucky, you get to hear the latest whispered gossip without contributing anything at all. Tonight, you hear someone mutter, "I swear if he slurps his stew like that again." Another voice answers, "I already sharpened my knife." It's probably a joke. Hopefully. Still no fireplace. Still no fresh air. And now, not even peace, but hey. You're still breathing and no one's thrown a bone spoon at your head. Yet. The day begins with the unmistakable sound of ice cracking in the water bucket. Not gently like a dainty ting, but aggressively, ka-chunk, as someone tries to smash through the top with the butt of a ladle. You're still half asleep when the cold clatter jolts you awake, followed immediately by the second sound of winter life, cursing, loud, muffled, inventive. The woman in charge of breakfast is standing over the bucket like she's just discovered betrayal in physical form. You keep your eyes mostly closed and pretend not to notice. That's the new morning ritual. Pretend you're still sleeping long enough that someone else gets picked to do the worst chores. But today, your luck runs out. She points at you with the ladle, and your name gets tossed into the frostbitten ring of responsibility. Your task, to fetch more water, which means you're about to experience one of the most brutal and absurd parts of Viking winter life. Outdoor hygiene. Or rather, the grim parody of it that happens when cleanliness meets temperatures so low they should come with a warning. You suit up in layers, tunics, cloaks, wool wrappings, mittens that were once two separate pairs but are now fused by fire damage and desperation, and you head outside. The door creaks, the wind screams, and your skin immediately regrets being born. The well is just 20 steps from the longhouse, but those 20 steps feel like a pilgrimage through frostbite and regret. The snow crunches under your boots, dry and sharp. You reach the well, a stone-lined pit covered with a wooden lid now frozen shut, and start the awkward, painful process of prying it open. You chip, you swear, you breathe into your mittens and try again. Eventually it gives way and you haul up the bucket, careful not to splash. Water is life out here. And wasting it is as close to a sin as you're going to get. You head back inside with your prize, slushy, half-frozen, probably full of bits, and receive a non-committal grunt from the stewmaster. You have earned your reward, not dying of dehydration today. Now let's talk about bathing. Or, more accurately, not bathing. In the summer, sure, people wash. They dunk themselves in streams, sit in saunas, scrub with sand or birch bark. But in the winter, no one's voluntarily stripping down unless A, they're drunk, B, they're desperate, or C, they've completely lost touch with reality. Baths are rare, dangerous, and, when attempted, deeply traumatic. That doesn't mean people give up on hygiene completely. Vikings were weirdly particular about grooming for people who regularly shared a room with livestock. Combs, tweezers, and ear picks are as common as knives and spoons. You've got your own comb carved from bone tucked in a pouch at your hip like a little talisman of civility. It doesn't do much to stop the lice, but it feels productive, and sometimes that's all you need. You find a seat near the hearth, where the fire is wheezing through a few half-burnt sticks, and you start pulling the comb through your hair. It catches almost immediately, probably on a knot the size of your ego. You grimace, tug gently, then less gently. A small clump comes free. You pretend it's normal. A boy nearby is cleaning his fingernails with the point of a bone needle. His hands are blackened from handling peat and animal hide. He scrapes until they're just dirty instead of criminally dirty, then wipes the shavings onto the floor. Hygiene is now measured on a sliding scale between visibly diseased and socially acceptable. You use a little melted snow to rinse your face. It's shockingly cold, like your skin forgot what temperature is and is now personally offended. You pat dry with the corner of your cloak. It's already damp from yesterday, but whatever. It's fine. There's a historical argument about how clean Vikings really were. Some sources, mostly from outside observers, often monks who are trying to shame them, claimed Norse people were overly obsessed with bathing and combing. Others say those observations were exaggerated, either out of cultural misunderstanding or spite. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle. In summer, grooming was practical and tied to health, social standing, even romantic life. But in winter was about survival. Cleanliness took a back seat to not freezing solid while rinsing your armpits. You shift your cloak and feel something move under your collar. A wiggle. Tiny. You slap it instinctively, then pull back your sleeve and inspect. Yep, lice. Probably brought in by one of the goats, or maybe the cousin who keeps borrowing your blanket without asking. You grit your teeth and start combing more vigorously. One woman has a lice strategy that involves rubbing her scalp with animal fat and ashes. Supposedly it suffocates the little beasts. Supposedly. You tried it once. Your head smelled like barbecue smoke for 2 days, and your pillow stuck to your cheek. The smell of wet wool and burned hair fills the room. Someone singeing fur off a hide with a torch. It's practical, also disgusting. You pull your scarf over your nose and mouth, not for warmth this time, but to block the worst of it. Meanwhile, a young girl is cleaning her ears with a thin stick and what looks like a bit of moss. You hope it's moss. She seems proud of the results, holding the stick up to show her brother. He recoils. She laughs. It's one of the first honest laughs you've heard all week. That's the strange beauty of winter life. Even the most miserable chores carry a spark of humour. Someone always finds a way to joke about the lice, the stench, the absurdity of trying to keep clean in a house where the ceiling is actively dripping soot into your tea. You laugh because the alternative is crying, and tears freeze on your cheeks anyway. Later, someone finds a cracked basin near the back of the house. There's talk of heating snow for a communal wash. Just faces, hands, maybe feet. Nothing too ambitious. You nod along, but deep down you know it's a lie. That basin hasn't seen water in 3 weeks. It's full of dust, fish scales, and a spoon someone dropped and never retrieved. Still no fireplace, still no bath. But you comb your hair, wash your hands with snow, and pretend your skin isn't slowly turning into burlap. It's enough, for now. You wake up with a distinct feeling that something is watching you. Not someone. Something. It's still pitch dark. The fire just a whispering bed of ash and ember, and the room is wrapped in that deep, smoky silence that only happens after midnight when even the goats have given up on chewing. But your eyes won't close again. Your breath catches. Something in the air feels off. Not colder, not louder, just wrong. You shift under your blanket, eyes scanning the rafters. It's a habit now. You've caught mice up there, a chicken once, a boot that somehow ended up wedged between 2 beams during an argument. But tonight, there's nothing. Just smoke curling along the ceiling like it's whispering secrets in a language you're not fluent in. Then it creaks, not the beam, not the wood, the house, a long, low groan that doesn't match any of the usual settling noises. You freeze, ears sharp, mouth dry. A few others stir, murmur, shift their cloaks tighter, but no one says anything. They felt it too. This is when the stories start coming back. You've heard them whispered through smoke and broth steam. Tales of things that move in the long nights, things that slip through the woods in the dark. Or worse, things that come inside. The Draugr, the restless dead who were buried improperly or lived badly. Warriors too greedy to let go, cursed souls wandering back through snowdrifts to visit the living. They don't knock, they don't speak, they just arrive. One of the children stirs in her sleep, whimpering softly. Her mother murmurs something, a lullaby or a prayer, and tucks her in tighter. You feel your heart slow a little, but your eyes still won't leave the shadows near the door. Someone once told you about a spirit called Myrkvida's breath, the breath of the dark wood, a presence that creeps into homes during the longest nights. It doesn't do anything violent, it just sits on you heavy as a corpse, waiting for you to stop breathing. They say you can't scream when it finds you. You can't move, you just lie there, eyes wide, lungs frozen, while it decides whether or not you're worth the trouble. You tell yourself it's nonsense. You also don't move. Now, superstition in Viking culture wasn't just for fun, it served a purpose. These weren't people with the luxury of science or therapy. Their world was brutal, unpredictable, and deeply mysterious. So when someone died unexpectedly or wandered off into a storm never to return, they made sense of it with stories. Ghosts, spirits, old gods and angry landwights. If something bad happened, it wasn't because life was cruel, it was because someone or something had been offended. That belief worked its way into every part of life, including winter. Especially winter. Outside, the wind moans across the roof like it is trying to come in. It howls low, then climbs into a high, keening whistle that makes the dogs stir uneasily. One of them growls, just a low rumble, like a warning to the darkness. You pull your blanket tighter and glance at the fire pit. Still glowing, still yours, still a weak, smoky tether to the living world. You think about the charms near the door, those bundles of straw, bones, and bits of cloth hung up by the oldest woman in the longhouse when winter first fell. She didn't say why, she didn't need to. Protection, clearly. From what? She just said, for what's already watching. Then she tied the knots and didn't speak of it again. Quirky historical fact. Viking homes often featured protective symbols carved into the beams or door frames. Vegvisir, Agishjalmur, runes etched for defence, direction, warding off spirits, not just decoration. These were talismans of survival, scrawled by hands that truly believed the difference between life and death might lie in the bend of a rune. You lie back and trace a finger along the edge of your blanket. There's a stitch there, a little knot of red thread someone once told you was lucky. A protective binding. You don't believe in it. Not really. But you haven't cut it off either. You're not sure how long you lie like this, eyes open, ears tuned to the strange harmony of the winter sounds. The wind, the fire, The slow shifting of people breathing in sleep. The occasional drip from the ceiling where snow is melting through the thatch. It's music in a way, if you stop being afraid of it. Eventually your mind begins to drift again. You remind yourself of the real things, the cold, the hunger, the rats. You've survived them. You're still here. You're not going to let a ghost story rob you of sleep you barely have energy to enjoy. You've shut your eyes. You try to ignore the fact that the wind just whispered your name. Or maybe it was the smoke. The next morning everyone is quiet. More than usual. Someone asks about the creaking. A few people nod. One man says he dreamt of a bear with human eyes. No one laughs. The fire is fed in silence. Bread is chewed slowly. You catch the oldest woman near the door adding another charm, this time a lock of hair tied with sinew. No one asks whose hair it is. Still no fireplace. Still no solid line between myth and memory. But the dawn has come, and the house, heavy with breath and stories, has made it through another night. The bread's gone hard again. You bite into it anyway, jaw working slowly. Teeth straining against the resistance like you're chewing on salted wood. It's edible in the technical sense. No mould, no visible bite marks from rodents, no chalky residue that screams, "You're going to regret this." But it's definitely seen better days. Probably about 3 weeks ago, when it was fresh enough to tear apart with fingers instead of axes. You soak it in stew. That helps. It softens slightly, enough to keep you from snapping a molar. The broth is thinner today. You don't even need to look in the pot to know that supplies are running low. The meat is stringy, barely there. You count maybe 4 parsnip chunks in the whole pot, and 2 of them taste like they've reconsidered their career path. The hunger's started humming in your bones now, not sharp, not panicked, just constant, like background noise. You've learned to ignore it most of the time, everyone has, but sometimes, when the fire burns low and the stew burns thinner, that hum turns into a growl. It's winter's quiet promise. Sooner or later, it's going to take more than just your comfort. No one says it loud. There's no need. You can see it in the way people eat slower now. Smaller portions, extra scraping of bowls. The way no one offers to share anymore, not even the kids. You see it in the new inventory system. Half a seal haunch marked with carved runes, meaning don't touch this unless you want to lose a finger. You see it in the way people glance toward the storage pit, then away, as if making eye contact with it will somehow empty it faster. You finish your bread and push your bowl aside. You're not full. You're not even satisfied. But you've eaten, and that counts. Across from you, someone else stares into their bowl like it's going to start producing food if they wait long enough. When the sun's out, which is rare, you can check the snow-covered mounds behind the longhouse, where you buried the rest of the food stores. But now even that is risky. Last week someone went to check the fish cache and found the covering disturbed, the fish half-eaten. No tracks, no clear signs of who or what had gotten to it. Could have been foxes, could have been wolves, could have been something worse. No one talks about that last part, but everyone's thinking it. You rub your hands together for warmth, then reach for the little pouch you keep tied to your belt. Inside, one withered apple. It's soft in the wrong places and bruised in the others, but it's still technically fruit. You don't eat it. Not yet. That's your emergency apple. You'll know when it's time. Hunger changes people. It peels away layers, shows you who they are when the stew runs out. Some grow quiet, some grow mean, some start doing mental math, calculating who eats the most, who eats the least, who might not be pulling their weight. You've caught yourself doing it too. You hate it, but you still do it. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. If it gets bad enough, you'll start looking at food differently. Not what it is, but where it comes from. There's a half-remembered story someone told at the edge of sleep last night, about a winter even colder than this one. A settlement cut off for months. When spring finally came, only half the longhouse was left. No one asked where the rest went. No one needed to. You glance at the goats, lying in their usual corner, warm and oblivious. They're not pets, not really, just potential calories on legs. But they're also milk, warmth, trade goods if spring ever comes. So for now, they live. Some families kill early in winter, preserve the meat, stretch it through the season. Others try to keep the animals alive as long as possible, hoping for milk or wool. It's a delicate calculation. One wrong choice and you lose both the animal and the meal. A woman nearby starts making something. Not food, there's not enough for that. She's mixing flour and water, forming tight little discs and baking them on a flat stone. Flatbread kind of. No salt, no fat, just bulk. something to fill the belly without offering much else. You've had it before, it tastes like regret and grit, but on days like today, even that's welcome. Quirky historical fact for you. Viking settlements often preserved food using souring, not just pickling in vinegar, but actual fermentation, like sour milk, soured barley gruel, even sour herring. The flavour? Horrifying. The survival value? Unmatched. There's a barrel near the wall right now that smells like a cow sneezed into it. You've eaten from it. You probably will again. There's some debate among scholars about how bad winter starvation really got. Some argue that Viking farmers planned well, storing up surplus in summer and relying on smoked meats in the root cellars. Others say that in harsher climates, especially in Greenland and the far north, starvation was a yearly reality. It depended on the season, the harvest, the trade routes, and luck. You're not feeling particularly lucky. You rise and make your way toward the edge of the longhouse, where a small box holds whatever dried berries haven't turned into stone. You pluck one, just one, chew it slowly, tastes like nothing, but it's something. And right now, that's the currency of hope. Someone laughs suddenly, dry, cracked, but genuine. They've found a potato that somehow sprouted in the root pile. A miracle, or a sign that it's rotting. Either way, everyone gathers to look. It's passed around like a relic. They'll probably slice it into a dozen paper-thin slivers and pretend it's stew. You smile. A little. It's absurd. But so is surviving a winter like this. You sit back down and glance again at your pouch. The apple is still there, bruised and waiting. Still no fireplace, still no feast. But the hunger hasn't taken you yet. Night falls with almost no warning now, like a trapdoor closing under your feet. 1 minute there's a dull grey glow leaking in from the smoke hole, and the next the longhouse is plunged into the kind of blackness where you can't tell if your eyes are open. The fire at the centre hisses as someone stokes it with peat, throwing up a brief spray of sparks, and then it settles back into its usual low orange sulk. Around you people are stirring, moving a little faster, voices lifting just a notch. Because tonight isn't just another long stretch of survival, it's a festival night. The first sign is the smell. Not stew, not dried fish, something richer, darker, sweetened with honey. You sit up and blink through the haze, watching as Brynhild pours a thick golden liquid into a carved wooden cup and hands it to her husband. He takes a sip and grins, his teeth glowing in the lamplight. Mead. Real mead. The kind they've been hoarding for weeks, maybe months, waiting for the right night. The kind that makes you forget your lungs taste like smoke and your blanket smells like goats. The second sign is the singing. Low at first. Just one voice humming near the door, then another joining in, then a third. It's not a song you know, but it's easy to follow. The melody winds like smoke, old and slow and strangely hypnotic. You find yourself humming along without even trying. The kids perk up. Even the goats look faintly interested. It's been weeks since anyone sang for real, not just as a lullaby or distraction. The sound makes the longhouse feel larger, like the walls are leaning back to give you space. This is Jule, or something close to it. The midwinter feast, ancestor of what you'd later call Yule, a rare break in the grind. A night to eat a little more than usual, drink something warm, tell stories, play games. A night to pretend, just for a few hours, that winter isn't pressing its thumb on your chest. You're handed a cup of mead. It's cloudy, viscous, heavy with the scent of honey and herbs. You sip, burns your throat in a pleasant way, coating it in warmth that lingers all the way down. Your shoulders relax a little. You didn't realise how tense they were until now. Someone near the hearth is slicing meat, real meat, not just a token scrap boiled to death. You catch a glimpse of it, a haunch of something roasted, glistening with fat. Could be lamb, could be goat, could be the mysterious special that's been hanging in the rafters for weeks. You don't care. You reach for a slice and let it melt on your tongue. Salt, smoke, fat, it's perfect. You almost cry. The kids are playing with carved wooden pieces, rolling dice etched with runes, laughing in the way only children can when they're half drunk on honeyed milk and the rare joy of extra food. One of them starts chanting a rhyme about a troll who sneezed so hard it created the fjords. Another corrects her. No, the troll bit the land. That's how the fjords came to be. They argue, then giggle, then topple into a heap. Their cheeks are flushed, their eyes bright. For a moment, they look like summer children again. A man at the far end of the room stands, cup in hand. He's older, broad-shouldered, his beard full of ashen crumbs. He starts telling a story, a real saga this time, not just a troll tale. A story about the Allfather wandering in disguise, testing mortals during the long winter nights, about rewards for hospitality and punishments for greed. He gestures toward the food with a wry smile. "Share," he says. "The gods are watching." Everyone laughs, a little nervously, and passes the bowls. Here's a quirky historical fact. Yule in Norse culture wasn't just a party. It was a ritual. People sacrificed animals, offered food to spirits, lit special fires to honour the sun's slow return. They believed the boundaries between worlds blurred at midwinter, that the dead could walk, that gods might drop by in the guise of strangers. Even the word Yule comes from Jule, which meant wheel, the turning of the year, the end and the beginning. Of course, scholars still argue about exactly what these midwinter rituals looked like. Some think they were solemn, sacred affairs full of symbolism. Others think they were basically the Viking version of a holiday bender. Looking around this longhouse now, people eating with their fingers, kids yelling over dice games, someone starting to drum on an overturned bucket. You're leaning toward the latter. You take another sip of mead. Warmth spreads through your belly like a small fire. For the first time in weeks, you're not thinking about smoke or hunger or rats. You're thinking about the sound of voices rising in song, the smell of roasting meat, the way the lamplight flickers across smiling faces. Even Astrid, the human smoke machine, is laughing with her eyes half closed, her spindle forgotten on her lap. The dogs inch closer to the hearth, tails wagging hopefully. Someone tosses them scraps. Someone else pours a few drops of mead onto the floor for the spirits. It's a small gesture, but it feels heavy, like a promise. You realise how badly you've needed this. Not just the food, not just the drink, the pause, the chance to be human again, to remember you're part of a story bigger than smoke and hunger. This night will end. The cold will still be there tomorrow. The stew will still be thin. But right now, the longhouse feels alive in a way it hasn't for weeks. You lift your cup and drink deep. Still no fireplace, still no luxury. But for a few precious hours you've got warmth, mead, and the sound of laughter thick enough to drown out the winter. The morning after the midwinter feast hits like a hammer to the soul, not just because of the mead, though the mead definitely deserves some blame. No, it's more the return of the ordinary. The fire is small again, the stew has gone back to being grey and questionably wet, and someone, possibly you, spilled something sticky on the floor that now crunches when walked over. The joy of last night has slipped out through the cracks, and in its place is the familiar embrace of a routine misery. You sit up, head aching mildly, back stiff, mouth dry and tasting faintly of goat. Someone hands you a cup of snowmelt water, and you accept it without words. That's how mornings work here. You're lucky if your first words aren't a groan. And because winter has a sense of humour, someone across the longhouse is already coughing again. Not just a little morning throat clear. No, this is the wet, hacking, lung-wrung kind of cough that makes everyone subtly tense and angle their bodies away. There are no masks, no medicine, no just stay home plans. Here, when you get sick, you stay right here with everyone else. Welcome to group immunity by exposure and sheer spite. You huddle near the hearth, hoping the weak fire will thaw your fingers. The cough continues. The same man from yesterday. He's older, gaunt in that way that suggests he hasn't been holding food down well. No one says anything, but you can see the others watching him from the corners of their eyes. It's not cruelty. It's calculation. Quiet, desperate and mental math. If he gets worse, it spreads. If it spreads, more people fall, and there's no healing room, no infirmary. The sick sleep inches from the healthy, breathing the same stale, smoke-choked air, shivering bowls and blankets, and the occasional half-eaten turnip. You reach into your pouch and pull out a piece of dried herb, something bitter that someone swore was good for the lungs. You offer it to the man. He takes it with shaking fingers, nods, doesn't speak. You don't expect it to help, but helping feels better than watching. The longhouse is quieter now. The feast used up everyone's spare energy. Even the children are subdued, playing half-heartedly with worn-out game pieces. You can feel the weight of winter pressing in again. Joy is expensive out here. You paid for it last night, and now the bill is due. Someone sneezes. Someone else mutters a prayer under their breath. Let's talk about Viking medicine, such as it was. If you got sick in the winter, your best hope was a warmth of amoos and herbs that might help, assuming they hadn't spoiled or been chewed by mice. There were healing rituals too, Charms, chants, sometimes a rune carved into a stick and buried under the floor. Healing wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. People didn't separate body and soul like modern medicine does. If you got ill, something was out of balance. And if it got worse, maybe something else. Someone was to blame. That's where things get even messier. You've heard the whispers, not about this man, at least not yet, but about others in winters past. When someone got too sick, or too many people started coughing, or when the food stores dropped right after someone's baby cried through the night. People talk. Superstition simmers just under the surface here, waiting for a reason to boil. A fringe belief not shared by all, but real enough to be dangerous. Sometimes illness wasn't just bad luck. Sometimes it was a curse. A spirit sent, or a soul gone sour. Sometimes people believed sickness had a face, a person in the house who carried it, shred it, welcomed it. And sometimes that person didn't last the winter for entirely non-natural reasons. You try not to think about it. But the tension in the room is growing, like smoke thickening before a storm. The man coughs again, hard this time, a deep rattle that sounds like a death announcement. His wife dabs his mouth with a scrap of cloth and it comes away red. You look at the fire, at the door, at the others. One moves. Someone gets up and starts stirring the stew too quickly, too loudly. The ladle hits the side of the pot with rhythmic clanks, a drumbeat for nerves. Another person starts humming, a tuneless, repetitive noise meant to distract or soothe or drown something out. You find yourself thinking about warmth again. Not the hearth, not the blankets, the kind of warmth that used to exist when there wasn't a sick man breathing beside you. When you weren't counting coughs, when you weren't wondering if you could get away with sleeping near the goats instead of the people. A young boy asks his mother if he's going to catch the cough. She tells him no. She lies beautifully. No hesitation, no falter in her voice, just certainty is what he needs to hear, what you need to hear. You don't believe her. Here's another strange fact. Viking healers, known as Leknir, were sometimes women, sometimes men, sometimes feared, sometimes revered. They used herbal knowledge, sure, but also chants, sacred knives, even iron talismans. Healing wasn't sterile, it was messy, and if it didn't work, well, people often wondered whether it was the healer's fault, or if the patient was simply doomed. Doom is a popular concept in Norse belief. Weird, the fate thread. Once it's woven, it's unchangeable. The gods themselves aren't immune. So if someone gets sick in winter, it's not because they failed, it's because the thread said so. But still, you watch. You worry, because fate is only comforting until someone starts dying next to your bedding. Later, the coughing man falls asleep, if you can call it that. He's limp, quiet, the rag still clutched in one hand. His wife keeps watch. Everyone pretends not to look. You shift your sleeping spot a few inches to the left, just enough to not feel guilty, just enough to breathe easier. Still no fireplace, still no medicine, still no safe distance, but morning came. And sometimes, that's enough. The woman is the first one up, she always is. You don't know her real age, 40, maybe 50, but Wint has a way of adding a decade or two to the face, and she carries herself like someone who's already lived through 5 more of these than she'd care to count. Her name is Alfhild, and while no one calls her the leader, everyone listens when she speaks, and when she doesn't speak, they listen even harder. She doesn't wake anyone, doesn't bark orders, she just moves, and things get done. You watch her quietly from your blanket as she crosses the longhouse with that familiar efficiency, straight-backed, eyes clear, hair tied back with a strip of leather, sleeves rolled and ready. She checks the embers first, always, pulls out a curved iron poker, stirs the ash, feeds it with care, and a fistful of dried moss. The fire obliges. Not with a blaze, but with a slow exhale of red that warms the space by 1/2 degree. She nods to herself. That's enough. Then she starts in on the day's work, boiling snow for water, checking the stew pot, running her hands over the bundles of hanging meat, as if she can feel with her palms how close they are to turning. There's no ceremony, no sighing, just motion. Quiet, necessary motion. You've heard people say she used to be married to a merchant, or a raider, or a farmer with his own boat. The stories shift like everything else, but the truth is simpler. She's the one holding the longhouse together. Not with fire or food, but with routine, with presence, with the certainty that someone is in charge of keeping things from unravelling completely. That's how Viking winter worked. not with grand gestures, but with silent survivalists like her. The women didn't just keep the fire going, they kept the people going. They remembered who needed what, who was slipping, who hadn't eaten enough, who was waking up in the night to stare at the rafters with eyes wide and hopeless. Someone coughs, again not the deep death rattle, but one of the kids this time, probably just cold air in the lungs. Alfhild doesn't rush over. She hears it, processes it, and adjusts the pot on the hearth to get more heat to that side of the room. That's how she works, not reactive, calculated. She knows the shape of this house better than anyone. She could probably walk it blindfolded and still tell you which board creaks near the stew shelf. Here's something modern people forget when they think about Viking life. The men may have sailed, fought, traded, and taken the credit in most sagas, but the women ran the world that made those sagas possible, especially in winter. Especially in houses like this, where 3 months of darkness could turn into madness without structure. And historically speaking, Viking women weren't just homemakers. They were landowners, healers, farmers, midwives, merchants. Some even led settlements when the men didn't return from raiding or trading. Their names don't always make it into the myths, but their fingerprints are everywhere. In the woven cloth, the carved bone tools, the preserved food, the perfectly balanced longhouse that somehow hasn't collapsed under the weight of boredom and bad weather. Alfhild walks over to the far wall and begins sorting through a pile of tools. Bone needles, sinew, scrap wool, broken handles, dull knives. She picks out a few, wraps them in cloth and sets them aside, for repairs. She knows who needs what, who's been wearing a hole into their boots, who'll need help before they For it, you stretch and sit up, still watching her. She glances over once, gives you a brief nod. You nod back. That's the language here. Small gestures. Quiet acknowledgements. No need to say more. Later in the morning, she coaxes one of the younger girls into helping her knead some barley flatbread. It's not much, barely enough flour to call it dough, but the act of making it feels like defiance. They shape the rounds carefully, placing them on a hot stone near the fire. The girl is smiling. Not wide, just enough to remind you that smiles still exist. And then, because Alfhild never stops, she checks on the sick man. She brings him water first, then runs a hand across his forehead, gently as if she's reading a map. He's sweating, not a good sign. She adjusts his blanket, wipes his lips with snowmelt, murmurs something soft. A word, a prayer, doesn't matter. It's the tone that counts. You notice no one else steps forward to help her. Not out of disrespect, but reverence. She moves like someone who belongs to a different order of winter survival. You help if she asks, otherwise you stay out of her way. Later, she pulls out her little pouch of herbs, not many left. She picks through them slowly, a bit of dried yarrow, some willow bark, a pinch of crushed juniper. She steeps it in hot water, stirs it carefully, and waits for the colour to bloom. When it's ready, she feeds it to the man, holding the cup to his lips like he's a child again. There's a debate among scholars about the actual medical knowledge Norse women had. Some claim they were just guessing, folk remedies, superstition, the occasional lucky outcome. Others argue that their understanding of herbs, wound care and symptoms was far more advanced than people give them credit for. You're not a scholar, but watching Alfhild work, you're starting to believe she knows exactly what she's doing. And even if she doesn't, she looks like she does. That's what matters. In the afternoon, she takes a break, brief but noticeable. She sits near the hearth, sips a bit of hot broth, doesn't speak. Everyone else respects the silence. Someone hands her a strip of dried fish. She accepts it with a nod, eats it slowly. No chewing with her mouth open, no complaint about the salt, just focus. When evening comes, and the fire is stoked once again, she's already laying out the plan for tomorrow. Who checks the roof, who rotates the meat, who tends to the goats. She doesn't bark orders. She assigns, and people listen. Not because they're afraid of her, because they trust her. Still no fireplace, still no titles or thrones. But if this longhouse has a heart, it is Alfhild, and it's still beating. There's a silence to the snow this deep into winter, a silence so heavy it feels like it's pressing on the roof, on your ribs, on your thoughts. You step outside only because you have to. That's the deal. You don't leave the longhouse in January unless something's truly essential. Firewood, waste, water or sanity. And today, it's all four. The cold hits you instantly. Not like a slap. Slaps are personal. This is bigger. It's like the entire world just exhaled through your bones. The snow crunches underfoot, but it's muffled. Even the sound of your own breath seems reluctant to leave your mouth. You wrap your cloak tighter and press on, boots sinking into powder that's almost waist-deep in places, crusted at the top and soft underneath. Every step is an effort. Every inhale a dare. You're not alone, of course. 2 others trudge beside you, equally hunched and miserable, dragging a sled between them loaded with the empties, buckets, sacks, and a few dull blades that need sharpening on the stones near the river. The sharpener is frozen solid, but there's always hope or delusion. At this point they're interchangeable. You're headed to the woodshed first. Not that it's much of a shed, just a leaning frame covered in snow-draped turf half swallowed by drifts. You scrape at the entrance with gloved hands until the door gives way. Inside, the last of the split logs are stacked in a sad little pile that might last 2 more days if everyone breathes shallowly and stops pretending they need warm feet. One of your companions grabs an armload and mutters something about taking smaller fires to heart. You nod. The joke isn't funny, but it's true. Every ember is a decision now. Burn too much today, and tomorrow you're huddling in the dark, watching your breath frost mid-air like a ghost. Then it's off to the waste pit. This is the part no one talks about when they romanticize the old ways. Where does it all go? The answer is, out here, into a snow-covered trench carved behind the house. You dump the buckets quickly, shivering as the wind slices under your cloak and finds the skin beneath. You try not to look, try not to think about the fact that you'll be back here in 2 days, probably less. There's a debate among historians about how Norse settlements handled waste in deep winter. Some believe they kept indoor pots and buried them periodically. Others suggest designated outbuildings, primitive latrines or privies of turf and wood. But out here, in these conditions, you suspect it wasn't nearly so organised. It was more likely a case of dig, dump, survive. Then comes the water. The nearby stream thankfully hasn't frozen entirely solid, but it's not exactly welcoming. You use an iron rod to break the crust of ice at the edge, then plunge your hands into the water and nearly scream. It's like dipping your fingers into another universe, one where pain is immediate and personal. You fill the buckets as fast as you can, sloshing cold water onto your wrists, your knees, your boots. It seeps in, it always does. One of your companions slips and lands hard on the snow. No injury, just pride. They swear, pick themselves up and stomp the snow like it insulted their ancestors. You don't laugh. You're too cold to laugh. Your jaw feels like it might snap if you move it wrong. On the way back to the longhouse, you pause just briefly, because the sky's doing something it hasn't done in days. It's clearing. A pale ribbon of blue cuts across the grey above, just enough to make you stop and stare. And then, there it is, the sun. Not a warm sun, not a generous one, just a sliver of golden white peeking over the horizon like it's checking in, making sure you haven't all given up. You stand there, water buckets in hand, you're soaking in exactly 20 seconds of light before it slips behind a bank of clouds again. But it's enough to make your chest ache. Back inside, you feel like you've crossed dimensions. The warmth isn't warm exactly, it's just less cold. But after what you just went through, it feels like a blessing. You set the buckets down and peel off your wet cloak, hanging it by the door where everything frozen goes to slowly sob itself dry. The others have already started chipping away at the woodpile. Someone is boiling snow for tea. No one says much. Everyone's noses are red, their fingers numb. But there's a shared look that passes between you. We made it through the outing. It sounds absurd, but these supply runs are heroic in their own way. Not flashy, not saga-worthy, but necessary. You don't survive winter in the north because you're bold. You survive because you do the chores. Quirky fact: Norse children were often taught to do these same chores by age 6 or 7. By 10, most could haul buckets, tend goats, and gather firewood. You look over at one of the younger boys now, barely tall enough to see into the stew pot, helping his older sister sort dried herbs into jars. His hands are chapped, his cheeks are raw, but he works without complaint. He knows what's at stake. You remember when this snow was new, clean, beautiful. You thought it would be magical, that you'd walk through a forest of white and feel like a part of some ancient fairy tale. Now it's a wall, a suffocating blanket of ments and cold and isolation. But you also know this: the snow will eventually melt. It has to. That's the promise the sun made this morning. The promise is small, fragile. But it's there. Still no fireplace, still no warmth that lasts longer than a cup of tea. But you brought the water, and for now, that's enough. It's sometime after midnight when the howling begins, not the usual wind groaning through the turf-packed walls, not the whimpering of a child caught in a half-dream or a dog barking at snow shadows. No, this is different. This howl has shape, distance. Hunger. You sit bolt upright beneath your blanket before you're even fully awake, your body reacting before your brain catches up. Someone else heard it too. Across the room you hear rustling, furs being pulled aside, a pot clinking faintly as someone bumps into it in the dark. A low voice mutters something that sounds like a curse or a prayer. You're not sure which. You reach for your boots and your cloak at the same time, fumbling in the near darkness. The fire's burned low again, throwing little more than a dull, pulsing glow into the centre of the room. Long shadows climb up the rafters like claws. Another howl. Closer now. The dogs, who have been surprisingly chill about everything up to this point, including plagues and goats giving birth in the stew corner, are suddenly wide awake and alert. Their hackles rise. One growls, the sound low and steady like a rope pulled tight. The other is already at the door, sniffing the gap beneath it, tail rigid, body trembling. You've heard wolves before, distant ones, cold echoes of them bouncing off the fjords, safe in their remoteness. But this is near. Too near. There's meat hanging outside, bones in the waste trench, goats, soft, bleating, walking targets, tucked into their little lean-to beside the longhouse. And that's the problem with surviving so well. You become a beacon. The door creaks open, just enough for someone, big quiet gunner, to slip outside with a spear in hand and a wool scarf wrapped around half his face. No armour, no time, just layers and muscle and the long experience of knowing how to not get eaten. You watch him go like you're watching a man walk into the mouth of something. The cold rushes in behind him, biting every exposed inch of skin. The goats start up their chorus. Nervous bleats, stamping hooves. That's all it takes. 3 other people jump up, including you, rushing outside into the dark to help. You don't even grab a weapon. There's no time. And frankly, you're not convinced it would help if a whole pack decides to pay a visit. Outside, the snow is sharp and moonlit. Not beautiful, not now. It's too quiet again, but in that bad way, like the air is holding its breath. You see Gunnar at the edge of the goat pen, one hand raised like he's commanding silence. You stand still, heart pounding. Then you see it, just at the edge of the tree line, low, wide, pale eyes, and another shape behind it, and another. Wolves, not a full pack. 3, maybe 4. They're not charging, not yet. They're testing, watching, weighing the risk. Wolves don't rush in stupidly, not unless they're starving or out of options. But winter is long and prey is scarce. They're getting close to out of options. There's a tense few minutes where nothing happens, just this standoff. Humans and animals, separated by 30 paces and 3 feet of snow. And then Gunnar shouts. Not words, just sound. Loud and guttural, like the storm itself just found its voice. He hurls his spear, not to hit, just to scare, and the wolves scatter, tails low, feet fast. They vanish into the trees like smoke. You exhale so hard your knees go weak. You gather the goats, check the pen, no harm done, just a warning. You throw more brush on the fire outside, let the light and scent do some of the talking. Wolves hate fire. Not always enough to stay away, but enough to think twice. Still, back inside, the tension clings like soot. The longhouse doesn't settle right. No one fully lies back down. People sleep in shifts now, rotating near the door, just in case. There's a historical debate about how often wolves truly posed a threat to Norse settlements. Some argue they were exaggerated in stories, used more as symbols of fear and death than actual dangers. But archaeological evidence of clawed livestock bones and gnawed human remains suggests otherwise. Maybe the sagas weren't exaggerating. Maybe wolves did haunt the edges of villages like ghosts made of teeth. A quirky fact to chew on. In some northern traditions, wolves weren't just predators. They were omens, guardians of the spirit world, messengers from the gods, or worse, servants of chaos. A lone wolf circling your home wasn't just looking for meat. It was a sign. And after a night like this, you start to wonder what exactly the universe is trying to tell you. You roll back into your bedding, heart still racing. The fire has been rebuilt higher this time, sending up thick ribbons of smoke that sting your eyes. Someone hands you a strip of dried meat. You chew without tasting. The children are quiet, bundled in their furs like little logs. The older ones are sitting upright, listening, waiting. You think about telling a story, something about Fenrir, the great wolf of the end times, chained beneath the earth until Ragnarok, but it feels a little too on the nose. Instead, you hum, just a low tune, old, wordless. It's enough to cut the silence just a little. Someone else joins in, then another. The longhouse, still tense, breathes together again. The wolves are gone, for now. Still no fireplace and still no barrier strong enough to keep the wilderness out. But you're here, and you're awake. When it finally happens, it's almost gentle. Not the dramatic moment everyone's been dreading, not the sudden scream or gasping final breath or the long drawn-out scene you've been bracing for. It's just quiet. A shape under blankets that doesn't stir when the dog brushes past. A form that doesn't shift for the pot of hot broth. The man by the hearth. The one with the cough. The one you watched fading a little more each day. He's just still now. Completely still. And somehow that stillness is louder than any cry could be. You know before anyone says a word. The way Alfhild moves toward him. Not quickly but with purpose, her face a careful mask. The way the others look without looking, eyes flicking toward the corner, then away again. Like glancing too long might make it real. You feel the weight settle into the room like a blanket made of snow. The children are sent outside to gather kindling. Even the smallest ones know what that means. They don't complain. They just go, heads low, boots dragging. The adults stay behind, not speaking, not breathing too deeply. Someone starts to make tea, that's always the first thing. Hot water, dried herbs, something to hold in your hands while your mind tries to make sense of it. Alfhild kneels by the body, adjusts the blanket so it covers the face. A small, deeply human gesture of respect. Not a ritual, not a rite, just kindness. The dead man's wife sits beside him, her face as blank as stone. No sobbing, no dramatic. Grief here is a quiet, private thing like so much else in this world. She touches his arm once, then lets it fall. That's it. That's goodbye. You sit near the fire, cup in hand, staring into the embers. The heat barely reaches you, but you welcome it anyway. It gives you something to focus on. Something other than the fact that you all just lost someone. Not to wolves or raiders, or heroic battle, but to the slow erosion of winter. To coughing and hunger and smoke and time. There's no priest, no chanting, no gilded ceremony. Just the steps you all know without knowing you know them. The body is washed, gently, with melted snow, and a few of the herbs Alfhild saved for the sick. The rags he wore are burned, not out of fear, but because it's the right thing. The bedding is shaken out, aired. The others move like clockwork, quietly coordinating without a single shouted order. A grave is out of the question, not with the ground frozen harder than iron. That kind of digging would take hours and burn more calories than you can afford. Instead, you'll build a platform, stones and wood, covered with earth and snow. It won't last forever, but it'll do until the thaw. That's how things work here. Winter doesn't allow for permanence, only postponement. There's some debate among scholars about how Viking Age winter deaths were handled. Some believe they kept the bodies inside until spring, wrapped and preserved by the cold. Others suggest temporary above-ground cairns, with more formal burial rites held when the earth softened. You're living the answer now, and it feels like a strange mix of both. Ritual in delay, reverence in fragments. Later, Alfhild gathers a few personal things, a carved bone comb, a scrap of dyed cloth, a small iron blade that had belonged to the man for years. These are placed beside the body, not because you believe he'll need them in the afterlife, though some do, but because they're his. And letting him go without them feels incomplete. As the light fades, a fire is lit outside near the platform. It's more than just warmth, it's signal and protection, tradition and fear were bundled into flame. Fire keeps the animals away, the cold away. The stories say it keeps other things away too. A few people gather by the fire watching the body in silence. No one dares say what they're all thinking. Will he come back? Not as himself, but as something else. A draga, a shadow, a bitter echo of a life lost too soon. That fear, irrational or not, is stitched deep into everyone's hearts. You've heard tales of the dead who return, not to haunt, but to claim. They knock at doors, they whisper, they curse the warmth they no longer have. That's why someone carves a protective rune into a flat stone and places it near the platform. That's why Alfhild speaks a few soft words over the body, not a prayer to a god, but a request. A farewell. A stay gone. Please kind of goodbye. You stay outside longer than you should, the fire licking at the night as your breath rises in clouds. You watch the stars blink through the dark. They're cold, distant, and wildly unimpressed by your grief. But they shine anyway. Maybe that's their way of helping. Inside, the longhouse feels different. Not empty. There are still too many bodies, too many breaths, but altered. Like something has shifted, just slightly, out of place. People speak softer. They move slower. Even the fire seems to crackle more quietly, as if it too understands the weight of absence. You lie down that night with your back to the hearth. Someone else is taking the sick man's usual spot. That's how it works. There is no ceremony to it, just necessity. But you feel it anyway, that small shift in the world. The breath that's no longer being taken, the space that's just a little too still, quirky historical detail. Some Viking homes would leave a small bowl of food near the body for the first night just in case the soul lingered and needed something for the journey. A kind gesture, a bribe, a superstition. Tonight, a bowl of thin barley broth is placed near the platform. Not full, just enough. Still no fireplace, still no room for mourning that lasts more than a night. But in this cold, fire-starved world, grief finds a way to burn quietly. And you're still here, so here you are, still breathing, still wrapped in that smoke-scented cloak. The longhouse is quiet again, quieter than it's ever been. Not empty, never empty, but softened by something more than exhaustion now. It's the kind of silence that comes when you've outlasted something. Not conquered, just endured. Outside, the wind's calmed. The last fire of the night crackles low, sending up occasional sparks that vanish into the thatch like shy stars. You hear one of the goats snoring, yes, goats snore, and someone's child mumbling in their sleep, caught in a dream that probably involves food, or light, or summer. You pull the blanket tighter. This winter didn't beat you. Not completely. You survived the hunger, the cold, the howling in the woods. You learned to sleep next to coughing neighbours and sit through long, smoky silences without falling apart. You found warmth in strange places, in the scrape of a spoon, the curl of steam, the rhythm of old songs hummed in the dark. There was never a fireplace, never a single hearth big enough to chase away everything winter threw at you. But you had something else, a roof that held, a fire that smouldered, people who stayed even when staying was hard. And sometimes that's what surviving is, a quiet kind of defiance. Not bold, not beautiful, but real. So now, as you close your eyes, body aching but whole, the cold licking just at the edges of your skin, you tell yourself one last thing. Spring is coming, even here, even now, even if it takes a little longer this year. You smile into the dark and finally let yourself sleep.